All right, and welcome to They Live by Film. I am Zach Bryant. We are a film discussion podcast discussing films around the world. With me today, as usual, is good old Chris, but with us today is not Adam. He is still out on maternity leave, paternity leave. I don't know what you call it at this point. I don't know. I think we're just going to say he's suspended. But to replace him for this week, we have Ryan from Disconnected. Ryan, how are you doing today?
Amazing. So depressed to be here tonight to talk about these movies.
Yes, I think the people listening will be glad when we actually talk about like Fast and Furious or something at this point, just anything else.
I know we need a palate cleanser.
How are you doing, Chris? How are you?
Man, I'm doing all right. Thank you. I get to be home for a full week. I've been traveling way more than I wanted to be, um, into exotic places like Tulsa, Oklahoma, and
Ooh, exotic.
El Dorado, Arkansas. I know. But yeah, I get to be home for a whole week and sleep, so I'm super excited about that. But yeah, no, I'm good, man. I think, we talked a little bit about this. I feel like this is, I'm glad there's not three more Von Trier movies. Like, I have a lot of respect for him as a filmmaker, but I felt like after the second Nymphomaniac film, right before I turned on Jack, I was like, okay, I think I'm glad this is the last one. It's a lot, man.
It
Now,
is.
Ryan, since you're here, I think it's only fair that we give you a little bit of an opportunity here to kind of plug your stuff since you've decided to suffer with us for tonight. So tell the people at home if they are unfamiliar with you, which I very much doubt. I think we have quite a bit of overlap, but go ahead and let them know what all you're doing right now because I know it's more than just disconnected.
All right. I will try to keep this as brief as possible. First, for those that don't know, Disconnected, it is a social media account and YouTube channel and podcast. I post all of the physical media announcements from boutique labels, from studios, from anywhere that I can scour and find. And then every Thursday night, we have a live show to cover those on YouTube and Twitch and basically anywhere that you go. And then I put that audio out as a podcast. And each Thursday, we have a guest there. And after we go over the announcements, we cover something related to film or physical media. And then on the other side of that, on Mondays, I usually post an interview with a filmmaker, somebody from one of these boutique labels, or creative in some way. And I try to highlight underseen people that are underappreciated, and I've gotten a chance to talk to some really amazing people, and I feel like that I've uncovered some information that we don't get out of interviews very often from some of those. So, definitely recommend checking that out. One of the other big things is I run the Someone's Favorite Productions podcast network, as I am the owner of Someone's Favorite Productions with my partner, Dr. Will Dodson. The podcast network is the home of Unsung Horrors, my podcast, and then, of course, the wonderful They Live by Film podcast. Thank you, guys. We are
Yeah, yeah.
over the next few months adding a few more podcasts. We are excited to bring those out to the world. But Someone's Favorite Productions doesn't end there. We also work on special features for discs. We are making short documentaries, making visual essays, audio commentaries, interviewing. In fact, I'm incredibly excited to announce some stuff we just did. We just did two of our biggest interviews yet, and I can't wait to see the reaction to these. We are also working behind the scenes on some things to improve accessibility with some of these labels on their discs, and I don't know, just excited to be working on that sector. And then probably the other big thing that I should shout out there, other than another podcast, which I'll bring up in just a moment, is I also put out a magazine as part of Someone's Favorite Productions called The Physical Media Advocate. It's available on Amazon, and it's also available in a whole bunch of brick and mortar stores. And if you are just lucky enough to live close to one of them, I would love it if you checked them out from one of these stores to support them. It is mostly in bookstores and physical media stores, record stores, stuff like that. But yeah, the other show, I just started another podcast called Film Foundations. It is primarily focused on getting the gatekeeping out of film. There's a whole lot of that out there, unfortunately, and so we're working on, highlighting things, being able to admit when you haven't seen something, and recognizing that that's not a negative thing. It's just an opportunity to see something else that you haven't before. And so we approach each episode as if we're talking to people that have never seen any of these before. And in some of our episodes, the two hosts, we haven't seen them before. So sometimes we bring in a guest expert, and they hold our hands as they introduce us to that sector of film and what is important about it and what we can learn from it. And I think at that point I should probably get off my high horse and recognize that I do too much. So continue on with your show. Thank you.
Honestly, I am incredibly impressive just like listening to it.
I know.
Have you found an extra day of the week that I'm unaware of?
Extra
Because
week in
uh,
a week.
that's
I
wild.
don't know. I simply choose to not sleep as much, I guess.
Yeah, I was gonna say check Ryan's Apple Health monitor, see how he's doing on sleep. Ryan, you the you have all that whole spiel. You have that tattooed on your forearm, is that right?
Oh gosh, I wish I would. It would make it so much easier. I mean, near the end of that, I almost forgot Film Foundations. We just started that. That shows it is not at the forefront of my mind.
Yeah, the first three up. I'm excited to dig into the third one because it overlaps with a series that we did. Zach, I don't know, have you had a chance to see the third one yet with them? What it
No,
is?
I've listened to the first one. I haven't gotten to two or three yet.
They're trying to. I think they heard about the Scream movies through our episode. That's what I'm going to assume. And they're running through all the Scream movies. You're welcome for introducing you to that, well, lesser known franchise.
Yeah, this guy, I think his name was Wes Craven. He seems pretty great.
He might go somewhere. Oh, that's funny, man. Actually, speaking of, before we get into what we've been watching and stuff, speaking of accessibility, just a quick plug for how much I hate Curzon right now.
Oh my gosh, yes.
This was the worst. Like I think this is the first one where the three movies we picked, none of them had any subtitles. There's
Yeah.
been some that have had English subtitles. There's been some that at least had subtitles from some country. I mean, they picked a dartboard to figure out which countries, but they would at least pick some. And then this one is none. Nope. Do you want to have it in 2.0 or 5.1? Those are your options.
Yeah.
And then not
Yeah,
only that, was y'all's on yours, it was 2.0 was automatically selected, right? For whatever
that's right.
reason.
Yeah, that's right.
Yep.
It's like, okay. Like that's weird, but sure.
No, I don't get it, man. Like I understand you're trying to cut costs and all that, but like these are studio released films. Like I would put money that Zentropa has subtitles as part of their release when they go theatrical or when they release it to home video or something. Even if you have to pay a little bit extra to get subtitles on the tracks, like these are well-known films. They're gonna sell. Like I don't get it.
Well, it's what I mentioned in the chat to you guys. I had the IFC release of the house that Jack built. It had subtitles. I know for a fact it had subtitles. And it's like, how come I don't know what the legality is on porting that, but I mean, it's like if IFC Midnight's doing it, you guys
Yeah,
have no excuse to spend all this money on like packaging and
wild,
not put subtitles on it.
wild. Then, anyways,
Which I know the Nymphomaniac, because I don't. I guess you guys probably noticed too that it actually said artificial eye on the menu. So I
yeah.
guess this is a previous release they had.
I think these all were just sort of like ported over from previous releases.
Okay, I wasn't sure about the
Um,
rest of them, but I noticed that on the Nymphomaniac ones.
yeah. There's another one. I have a Jim Jarmusch set from Germany, which I'm an idiot. I didn't double check. It doesn't even have English subtitles. But
They weren't hard burned in, were they? Like I've had that happen before, where you get the foreign, like it's an English film, but they've hard burned in like the foreign subtitles into it.
oh, good question. I'll have to check on that. But yeah, they just basically like literally kind of glued together different, Blu-rays from different companies, and I think they even have the same artwork from the different companies or something. So sometimes companies do that. But anyways, yeah, what have y'all? I know that we've been busy this week with, let's see, 5.5 plus 2.5, 8 hours of Von Trier movies. Have y'all had time to watch anything else?
Why don't you start, Ryan? Since you're the guest, the special guest for tonight.
Oh, happily. I am working on some other things. So some other titles that I can't talk about. I got to watch those this week. That's a terrible thing to break up on an audio podcast. But one thing that goes in with what we just said, I wanted to highlight how much some of these labels care about this. I'm working on a film right now from Hong Kong that has burned in Mexican subs. And we are looking to try to cover those in a way that's not too distracting for the eye with English subs that are burned in on top of the Mexican subs. Um, it's not
So,
easy.
so Ryan, please elucidate us. What is a what is a Mexican subtitle?
Well, it was a Mexican release. Yes, the language itself is Spanish, but it is from a Mexican release, so it is a Mexican subtitle. Thank you, sir.
No problem. I don't know how. That's good. Um, interesting. So,
Wait
so
till
you're gonna
Chris
have to.
figures out that England English and American English are two things.
uh, I'll share one other thing that we can talk about. I'm working on another podcast episode with somebody, so I had to watch two films for that. They are Le Chèvre. It's a French film from 1981. It's a buddy cop movie, and then it led to an American remake with Martin Short and Danny Glover called Pure Luck from 1991. So the original was written by Francis Weber, and essentially it's about this businessman whose daughter goes into somewhere in South America or Central America or something like that, and she just literally goes missing. And the only thing that we know about this daughter is that she has the worst luck. No matter where she goes, everything possible that is terrible happens to her. And one of the people at his company recognized that somebody else he knows was also like that. So he thinks logically, let's go with the guy that has bad luck and see what happens to him, and maybe we can find the daughter. And it's just hilarious, happenings for the next 90 minutes of the silliest out of nowhere things happening to the same person over and over and over again. And what's crazy is the American remake, it's almost an identical movie. It's literally just they watched a French film, thought it was really great, and said, "Hey, do that, but in white English, please."
Uh-huh.
It's pretty good.
Oh, interesting. Because the way you started talking about it sounded like The Vanishing a little bit, but it sounds like it's a comedy version of that.
Oh, yeah, 100% comedy, yes.
Ah, interesting. Okay, sounds really cool. And you're working on that for a podcast?
Yeah, I'm covering it on an episode of the Culture Cast that I'm going to be appearing on here soon.
Oh, very cool.
Yeah, I thought it was going to be the podcast we were on, and I was going to be like, "Don't worry, guys. It'll be like 3 months before you see it. Don't even be out looking for it yet. It'll come out soon."
It's true. What about you, Zach?
Oh man, I've actually been watching a lot. So, of course, I waited to the last minute to watch the three films we're going to talk about tonight because I don't know. I'm a sadist at this point with how late I wait to watch them. I also just afraid I'll forget everything if I don't. But I actually
Mhm.
watched two more movies after that. I started out with Michael Bay's 13 Hours, which I have not seen since it released. Pretty good. It doesn't have nearly enough Bayham for me. I assume he did that because these are real people, but there's a whole shot with like a camera following a mortar as it crashes into a roof, and I'm like, that's pretty dope. He should have done more of that, but I get all that in an ambulance, so it's fine.
Is it a war movie?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's about the Benghazi attacks in 2012.
Oh, okay, okay.
Yeah, yeah. Um, and then of course, I just got done with American Sniper, which I also have not seen since it came out. I worked in a movie theater when American Sniper came out. What year did that? Yeah, yeah. I was working at a movie theater then, so I actually saw it a couple days before it officially opened. Then, and that was probably the last time I saw it, and I was kind of always afraid to go back and watch it because I was like, you hear a lot of things, especially if you like read a bunch of different reviews. You're like, oh, it's American propaganda and stuff like that. My girlfriend actually watched part of it. Her dad's military guys done several tours. Really effective. Like I was actually impressed with how well that movie's done, like how well it talks about the PTSD stuff.
Oh yeah,
And
yeah,
Bradley Cooper is awesome in that movie. Like
yeah.
I kind of give him a hard time in a lot of stuff, but that might be his best role he's ever done. Dude's jacked in that movie.
Yeah.
And it's still like I went and looked because I was like, I know he was nominated. And that was the same year that Michael Keaton was nominated for Birdman. And I was like, oh yeah, yeah, you lose to that, that's fine. But no, they lost to Eddie Redmayne. Like, what a fucking tragedy. Either one of them should have won over Eddie Redmayne for Theory of
Oh,
Everything.
is that the transgender movie that Eddie Redmayne won?
No, that's Danish Girl. No, this
Yeah,
is the
Danish
one about
Girl.
Stephen Hawking.
Oh, okay, okay.
Yeah, so
This is
he
the one
won
that
for
made
that.
Eddie Redmayne show up on the map for everybody.
Yeah,
Oh, I
and
see, I see. Okay.
that movie's not good. So I don't even
Oh,
know
really?
why he was nominated. It was very much an Oscar bait movie, so it's not my thing. But beyond that, yesterday I watched the roast of Tom Brady. I know you guys like sports, so have you guys watched that?
It's on my list for soon. I've not watched it yet.
Oh, it's great to just listen to. Like, I actually didn't watch it. I was listening to it for 3 hours. Chris, I guess you haven't got to listen to it yet.
3 hours? No, is it good? Is it funny?
Like, so it, if you're used to the Comedy Central stuff, they do that for like an hour and a half, and it's very tight to this point where they're cutting out most of the bad jokes. It's paced really well. You're not seeing the flubs. You're not seeing the mistakes. This is pretty much raw footage of Netflix doing a roast, so you get
Okay.
all like the awkwardness with it too.
Oh,
But
okay.
I actually think it makes it a pretty good show, because just to see that. And
No,
yeah,
I
you're
agree.
hearing the same joke 20 times. That Comedy Central's a little bit better about cutting them down, just trying to put the best version of those jokes in there. So you're going to hear that Gronk's an idiot about 200 times, but it's actually pretty funny, because I won't ruin anything, because I do think it's enjoyable. But the best part of that was I was actually getting tired of how the Gronk is dumb jokes. And then he gets up there to do his part and he messes up the word strawberry. And I'm like, yeah, that's perfect. Makes them all worth it.
That's awesome. Oh, well, I haven't seen that much. I was traveling, like I said, but two things I want to probably call out. So I've been going through the films of Michele Soavi, um, and the first four films, I guess, right, when he broke off from Argento. So have seen in the last, I guess since the last time we recorded, have seen Stage Fright, which we spoke about, and then The Church, and then The Sect, and I'm about to watch, um, what's it, The Cemetery Man again, Della Morte, Della More again. And then I'll probably watch them all one more time prior to recording a podcast with Sam Deegan the week of the 27th. And I want to see them all again just because I'm intimidated to record a podcast with her. She goes so deep, especially on Italian genre cinema. So I'm
Stage
trying
fright
to
is
watch.
so good though. It is so good.
Oh
I,
yeah.
I don't want to take anything away, because I know you got to like say all this stuff in a podcast. I don't want to like make you spoil your best stuff, but
Oh
I
no,
just
it's
want to
okay.
know that movie's great.
It's awesome, man. Every time I see it, I like it more too. Um, and then I had some time at night where it was quiet and it was alone, so I put on the next Emmanuel movie. Finally, I'm up to Emmanuel and the Last Cannibals,
I mean, what is
and
that, like number 10 of 400?
the well, yeah, the ones that they, the Severin box set is just focused on the Black Emmanuel stuff. So mostly Laura Gemser, although that's not always true. There's a few other exceptions, but this is the one where she hears about a tribe, basically like a tribe that they think is extinct, but it's a tribe that practiced cannibalism, and so Joe D'Amato's the director, so typical
Oh, this is gonna be wonderful.
Joe D'Amato style. It gets pretty vicious. Um, it's I don't know, man. I don't know what it is. Like, they're just these movies are they just deliver on what they say they're gonna be, and they're wild. These some of these films are just crazy. So this is definitely one of those. I think the one that still takes the cake for me is when she like the one right before this was I forget the exact title, but it's like Emmanuel in America or something like that. And it's the one where they really lean into bestiality.
The audience is dying for us to just cover all of these movies on this show now.
Oh man.
They're gonna be
Yeah.
itching for it. We're gonna get emails.
Especially when we started off calling this a Criterion podcast. Oh boy.
Oh, those were the days.
Yeah. Speaking of the wild side of Criterion, I mean, I think we're about to get into somebody who walks both worlds well, balances both worlds well.
Good
Yeah, so
transition.
if you guys are ready, I guess we're gonna start on finishing up the feature films of Lars von Trier. Well, I think with this, we're going to start this 5.5 hour journey of whatever this was with Nymphomaniac Volume 1. In case anyone's curious, we are going to still treat this as two different films. We're going to do Volume 1 and Volume 2 differently. I believe all of us, since we watched on the Curzon set, that we all watched the director's cut. So if you think these were only 4 hours to watch, well, each one of them added about an hour. So it's a long time. But for Volume 1, according to good old Letterbox, it is a man named Seligman. I
Yeah.
actually forgot. How do
Yeah.
you say that?
Yeah. Seligman.
Seligman finds a fainted, wounded woman in an alley and brings her home. She tells him that her name is Joe and that she is a nymphomaniac. Joe tells her life and sexual experience with hundreds of men since she was a young teenager, while Seligman tells about his hobbies such as fly fishing, reading about Fibonacci numbers, or listening to organ music. So, this is going to be an interesting discussion. So, before we get into it, though, I would love to hear where this ranks on They Shoot Zombies.
This is crazy because we were talking the other day about some of the wild like comedies that are on They Shoot Zombies and stuff, right? But Nymphomaniac is not on the list. The,
Didn't we get Boss of It All on there somehow? I feel like there was one that was just way out of there that we got.
no, Boss of It All didn't make it on.
I'm shocked.
I know, but yeah, like there's not a single critic that put this on their top 10 horror list,
Man, I
which
need to become famous just so I can do it, just to get it on the list.
10 the 10 non-comedies of Lars von Trier, just like um yeah, but it is on They Shoot Pictures. Interestingly enough, so remember this year, I think I mentioned this before. This last year was where they like added like a whole bunch of new critics. Like
Yeah.
so, they're trying to expand, right? The representation. This dropped 3,200 spots. So it was at 4,879. It currently sits at 8,134.
Yeah, that makes sense to me. I mean, I guess I'll slightly spoil my thoughts as I'm not the biggest fan of either one of these. So
Yeah.
that'll be fun. But I did see, since I did get it spoiled, that Ryan was a fan of these. So I do want to hear from Ryan on his thoughts on volume one.
Man, this is hard to discuss as two different things because after you get done, they kind of evolve into this entire piece.
Yeah.
One thing that I will allude to once we start to talk about the ending eventually, I really appreciated how Seligman throughout both of these, I kind of interpreted him as the narrator, meaning obviously he's like pushing our story along, but uh, he's actually playing proxy for us, is how I got that. He was asking all of the questions that we as the audience would like to know. He was trying to be respectful. He was trying to be fairly kind and also care about somebody. And most of us would say if we found somebody, unconscious in the alley by our house, we would probably try to help. And the way that he came across as so humane throughout all of Volume One was great. I mean, the way that delivered the story through him was useful, and I would appreciated that greatly. Um, I feel like the story gets disjointed quite a bit. One thing I'll go back to something that we both said earlier. I think this would have been a hell of a lot better if I had subtitles.
Yeah, for sure. A lot of talking in this.
Yeah, and a lot of different accents, which
Yeah.
not a bad thing, obviously. But when you're going back and forth, and you've got two young kids sleeping in the house, this isn't the kind of movie that you turn up to 60 on your sound system just to make out the words.
Are you
Right.
saying you didn't
Unfortunately.
watch this movie with your children?
I definitely watched it with my wife, who, by the way, her score would not be as high as mine. I give you that.
Well, this is supposed to be a fairy tale, so your kids technically could watch it according to Venture.
You can get a lot of things done with this. I mean, if you want to teach your kids the birds and the bees and the abortions, you're good to go. Just get it all out at one time.
Well, speaking of kids, I got to think from the first one of these two movies, I kind of really loved Uma Thurman's scene in this.
Oh,
I sh-
great.
she killed it. Her acting was incredible. The story was depressing, which it's Lars von Trier, so nothing about that is surprising. The situation was so believable and just so sad for everything that we know about all of those characters. But man, she acted the hell out of that scene.
Yeah.
What about you, Chris? What are your thoughts on volume one?
I have a lot to say on Uma Thurman. I think it's the best scene of the three movies that we're going to talk about today. So, big fan of that. Um, you know, I gone on this like emotional journey with Lars von Trier since we started this. Like, he has this public, for those who just skim the surface, they're mostly going to think he's a scumbag in terms of like the news that's out there and stuff, right? Heard a ton of behind the scenes features. Heard an interesting behind the scene interview with Stellan Skarsgård, who calls him a very sweet, soft spoken man, which I thought was interesting. He's been called a feminist by most people that work on his movies. He hired a feminist to help him write this movie, or at least help with the ideas for this movie, and then started dating her. um, uh, this journey of watching Von Trier, sort of the public figure versus who he is in these movies, has been fascinating. And I think Nymphomaniac 1 and 2, although I know we're talking about them separately, he does something which I think is going to be a theme over the next, these all three movies today, is which he really exposes, I think, a lot of like himself. Like I think he started that in this whole Depression trilogy, I think is him kind of dumping his mind and you know that he's really into fly fishing and he's really into Fabrizio's law or whatever it's called, like
Fibonacci
whatever,
sequence, yeah.
Fibonacci sequence, whatever. Thank you. Like he's like all of these things that Seligman brings up is are just things that he's into. And I read somewhere that he wanted to portray this as logos versus eros, kind of logic versus passion, right? Um, and that was the dialogue in the first movie, and I think that certainly played out that way. But he is also apparently a man full of perversion and like full of interest that like a lot of people would find to be distasteful. And so the character of Joe was apparently also him. So he's not writing for a woman, he's writing himself, and found because of the way he views women in society, he found this character would be received better as a woman than a man who's basically a nymphomaniac. That term, his perspective is that men don't get called that as much. It's more of a badge of honor for men instead of a burden, as it is for Joe. So this is the thing, a long-winded way of saying, this is the thing with Lars von Trier for me, is that like as he gets towards the end of his career, I find his movies to be intellectually interesting, and he has a lot of interesting ideas that he brings in, and like lots of mm, like very intellectual kind of debates on taboo topics, I guess, right? That's kind of his thing, is he's trying to bring a more open discussion and dialogue into a lot of like taboo topics. Um, but I also find the movies get progressively less interesting to watch. I think, so that's not to spoil how I go here, but I think Nymphomaniac 1 for me is my favorite of the three we're going to talk about today. I think it still really captured my attention. I got that he was trying to make a fairy tale. I thought it was interesting. Obviously an adult fairy tale. Uh, and yeah, I think he pulled it off well. I think he made a movie that will age well. I think there's a lot of interesting discussion in it. And I also think if there's a critique of it where somebody would say it's kind of pretentious drivel, um, I could also see that argument, and I could understand why people wouldn't like it, even though I did.
I kind of find it fascinating to say I like a Lars von Trier movie. These type of movies are the one that you reflect on, I feel like, and
Yeah.
even the one that I like the most, which happens to be one that we will be talking about tonight. I don't even know that I would like outwardly say I like this movie. It's hard to say that. It's
Right.
mostly just like I feel compelled by these movies and I feel
Yeah.
pushed by these movies. And to add to something that you and I seem to both be getting at a little bit, I was taken aback by this first one because I mean, first off, the all I had seen before we did this watch together was the marketing for this, which was mostly like character posters of everybody in this film making a face that they suspect that they make when they're having an orgasm. And I got to admit, I was kind of taken aback by just how human this first film was. There wasn't even much like taboo. It was very normal. It was very just human sex. It wasn't anything really until the second one that even most people would call extreme or even kinky related. It's
That's right.
kind of impressive that he pulled off such a film with such a reputation from something so tame when it comes to the sexual content.
Yeah, like the thing I find so fascinating, and I think this is the right call, as much as I'm probably going to get critical of not this one as much as the next one, but the one thing I think he made the right call in is for all the unsimulated sex and stuff in this movie, it's a very unsexy movie in every way. It's
Absolutely.
very clinical in the way it films those
That's
that he
right.
films it. It's very matter of fact.
That's right.
It's not porn, and I mean that's it's that idea. How do you define porn? Well, an easy one would be if you're having actual sex in the movie, but that kind of challenges that idea.
Hmm.
I wouldn't call this any type of pornography. And I think that's the point. I think, when we're looking at someone like Joe's character and what she is kind of going through, I mean, for her, sex is, we call it addiction, we call it whatever we want to, but it's something that has to be done versus what pornography would tend to be for.
Yeah, there's something that I think is fascinating in any interview with Von Trier or people that seem to understand him. Skarsgård has said the same thing about him, and Von Trier said it himself. He really seeks to call out hypocrisy. That's something he's very passionate about. And I think obviously that can be a noble cause if it's said a certain way. I think Joe in this movie seeks to call out a lot of hypocrisy around sex, right? And she's very vocal about mm, like not wanting things to be taboo or something like that, right? Which I could certainly see Von Trier saying. Um, the funny thing is, Ryan, we've mentioned this a couple times now, and I think it certainly could be talked about here in this movie as well. Is Von Trier has a little bit of troll in him. Like he can't fully like deny that he's a little bit of a troll.
Oh
Right?
yeah.
Like he likes to kind of get a rise out of people, and it's so hard for me to distinguish what ideas for him are authentic versus him kind of intentionally being provocative. And I don't know how that balance is, where he strikes that balance. But it's complicated because we were talking about Gainsbourg before the movie. Neither Gainsbourg or Stacey Martin, who plays teenage Joe, like early 20s Joe, neither one of them had any sex in the movie. Stacey Martin says her underwear was on for every scene. So, and everything was CGI. She had like little black dots all over her body where they were going to do CGI. So he takes care of his actors, no matter no matter what he wants to do on an intellectual level and like challenging people. Like he does still take the actors into consideration. So I don't know. It's like the best I can kind of think about is these movies are just like this big intellectual exercise for him. Like I don't know, like college kids just drinking beer late at night and arguing over philosophical things, or like it feels like he never lost that kind of lust for or knowledge and like uh taking things to like the logical conclusion, right? Like it's sort of, he just kind of never lost that side of him.
Yeah, one I think I read an interview. Her name's Gainsborough, right? I'm not is that
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So she was talking about because Ryan, you were talking about the posters where they're all making an O face, basically. And she said that was actually the moment she was the most uncomfortable because it wasn't Von Trier filming it.
Yeah.
And she even admitted that she's had her father film her nude for his movies. And I'm like, and that's what makes you uncomfortable. Okay, that's fine. But it is a fascinating thing to hear. Because obviously she's not someone who's very bothered by being nude. She's not very bothered by sex or, on film or anything like that. But, obviously she does have some sort of comfort that's very fascinating to see. Like you feel like that would be the easier one to do versus what she's asked to do in these films, even if it is like CGI or however it's done.
Right. Do you think it's worth just for a minute kind of breaking down the structure of the movie? Because I think that plays into this, right? So
Oh
this
yeah.
is just like his other movies, this is something that's broken up into chapters, right?
He loves his chapter
Um,
breaks.
he does. It's fascinating, right? People keep like Skarsgård and also Defoe in a different interview. They keep talking about this idea of him creating fairy tales. That seems to be something that's very important to him, is like kind of like creating a modern fairy tale. Um, I don't know how I feel about that. I guess if you were to look at who are the really famous fairy tale guys where they're actually pretty fucked up when you read them.
Grimm Brothers.
Oh, Grimm brothers.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like a lot of the stuff, like a lot of the, they write for kids, but like a lot of the content in that book is like a horror movie or in those stories.
Yeah, and I mean, they get kiddified, I guess is the word to go with. But I mean, yeah, they have this basis, and um, you know, I guess what we say about Von Trier going to its logical conclusion. If you're going to have a story about, you know, a wolf following a girl who's going to her grandmother's house, then somebody's going to get eaten. I mean, that's just
Right.
that's just how it goes.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And I think because they're fairy tales, to me, there's always this interesting quality in the last like 4 or 5 movies we've seen. And I think it happens here too, where the tone never gets that dark, even if the content on the screen gets dark temporarily, right? Like you
Yeah,
kind
it's
of
almost
keep,
like he's at a he's always like at a distance, or he's up above the events, or
yes, that's
yeah,
a,
it's a very interesting approach, because especially for someone who's criticized for, a lot of disturbing content, it's never filmed in a way to necessarily be disturbing.
right.
It's like this matter of factness. It kind of reminds me of how do I put it? And I guess it makes sense since he did The Kingdom, but it almost feels like when you see like medical footage, it's not there to be gore or be there to gross you out necessarily. If it does, it does, but it's supposed to be very clinical, non-passionate, that sort of
Yeah,
thing.
very
Yeah.
humanizing.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's something I want to talk about. I think this is more of a conversation in part two, but that's an interesting word, Ryan. I understand why you said it based on the direction the conversation was going. But I actually felt I was curious if y'all agree with this. So I I couldn't believe that I was invested, first of all, in a 2.5 hour movie, which is mostly just people talking in a room with some recreations as to what they're talking about, right? And obviously some of the recreations are a little bit longer. It's not all them talking. But I was joking with y'all that this is like a Princess Bride. Um, but it has the same structure to that story, right? It's like older man, younger in this, not quite a kid, but like younger person, in who's in bed. They're telling stories. They cut to the recreation of the stories, and they kind of cut back and forth a few times, right? That's my tie-in to how this is like the Princess Bride. Um, but I didn't actually think that he was trying to make human characters. Like I think he was, so I want to ask y'all about that because I actually think he was trying to like stay in metaphor and like make, because even Seligman calls her out a few times for the coincidences in her story being unrealistic, and she says, "Well, you'll get more out of the story if you just listen. What do you want? Like, what do you want? Do you want to get something out of this story, or like?" I forget exactly how she phrases it, but it's basically like, do you want to just go on this journey with me or not? Right?
Yeah. And I mean, I guess this is one of the things where I'll be the kind of the negative person when it comes to that, because it's this very postmodern sort of meta idea. These are almost just two omniscient storytellers. It's almost like brainstorming you do when you're writing. If you let somebody else borrow your work and you're like, well, this is what happens. They said, well, this is I see what you're going for here, but this is kind of contrived, or this is too much of a
Yeah, yeah,
coincidence, or
yeah, yeah,
things
yeah,
like
yeah.
that.
Uh-huh.
I can get, I get a little annoyed by it because it's almost like that. I think because I've seen it too many times where it's like, okay, if I call this out, I can't get criticized for it. If I call out, yeah, her meeting Jerome again is super contrived, but I called it out. So therefore, I know what I'm doing. And I don't know. It's a small little annoyance for me in a lot of things, because I think films, a lot of meta films will do that. It's like, hey, a character called it out, so therefore it's fine. Or it's like, no, you just brought attention to it, but that's fine.
See, and I was looking at it as Seligman was the audience again, or still And with Von Trier saying that he was the character of Joe, in that room, he's literally answering the audience, saying, is this true? Is this important for the story? This seems too far fetched, whatever. And the funny thing is that is probably in reference to some of the things in regards to his earlier stories with questions he was literally asked based on some of those other films. And putting that in there, Zach's probably right. It's probably like you're gonna say this about this story, but it doesn't matter because I'm calling it out right now. So just kind of deal with it. And I don't know. To me, it didn't seem too out of place because these people don't know each other, and to call out the far fetched ideas and the idiosyncrasies makes sense. But at the same time, I mean, a lot of what was said up to that point, other than the coincidences, was already far fetched. And if this person is willing to, the opening chapter is her talking about how she forced herself on a married man on a train. Like most people just wouldn't straight up admit to that. So if she's going to do that, you can probably guess the rest of the stuff that she's saying is true already.
Or yes, okay. I'm thinking about the idea of Seligman being the audience proxy. I I want to go with it for a second, but the other possibility is that um, if you start with a story like that, I'm just trying to think through the logic of what you said. If you start the story with something like that, the other possibility is that you're asking the audience to kind of come along with you on this journey where um, the hero, the heroine or hero, whatever, the protagonist, you're just gonna kind of go with them and then, you know, just wait till like just stay with me till it gets all the way to the end. Like this is gonna be entertaining, but there's gonna be some substance here. And then when you get to the end, you'll understand why we've kind of told this in the way that I have, right? I've kind of told this in the way that I have. And so in that way, then Seligman is the one who's like the voice of the audience saying, uh, like checking in on how we're doing almost in a way. Is that kind of what you're saying? Like, if Von Trier's asking us to just stay with him for 5.5 hours,
Yeah,
then we can't just watch the story. We need like that little breakup of somebody being like, "Hey, just checking in. Like this sounds crazy," and she's like, "Well, you want to go with me on this journey or not?" Basically.
right.
So it's kind of okay.
Yeah, that's exactly how it felt for me. It felt like are you still paying attention type of moment.
Yeah. Did y'all find it enjoyable where the two characters going back and forth with each other kind of felt like, well, I'm gonna give away how I felt, I guess, with the question. It felt to me like he was trying to show off how smart he was when they went back and forth a little bit, just in the sense of like it's not really how people talk to each other. But how was that for y'all when he started going off onto these, you know, these crazy stories about like a book he has on his bed or the picture of the Virgin Mary or um, whatever he has like around his room that she then dovetails into telling like a bigger part of her story, like those little interludes. Did y'all enjoy those, or did you enjoy the story more, or like the balance? Like how was that for y'all?
So for the first part, and I won't speak too much on volume two. I had more issues with it in volume one.
Mhm.
Like I'll be honest, like it took me a while. It really took me until the Mrs. H segment, which I know we'll probably do a whole part on that, so I won't talk about that yet. For me to really feel invested in the film as much as I needed to, because I did find those conversations not interesting. There's one at the very beginning that annoyed me. So we're going to talk about Fibonacci sequence, and there's a part where she says like two numbers. I think she says 3 and 5 for something. I can't even remember the context, but
Mhm,
she says
mhm,
3 and 5, and he's just like, "Those are Fibonacci sequences." Part of the Fibonacci sequence. I was like, "Dude, those are two numbers that are two of the first 10 numbers in the Arabic numbers." Like, what? Like stuff like that kind of annoyed me because I'm like, that's just so like if she had said like her code to her house was like 00123 or something or whatever, I'd be like, okay, yeah, you can say something about the Fibonacci sequence or whatever. But I was like, 3 and 5, man, really? That's so little things like that kind of annoyed me, to be honest. And it seems nitpicky, but it took me a while to kind of like get into that conversational element because of it.
I got to be honest. I don't want to say this and sound like I'm letting him off the hook for everything. I promise. But the way that once it hit me that Seligman was my proxy in the film, I took that as interpreting the way that people have responded to Lars films throughout his entire career of finding all of these unnecessary meanings in what he's putting on screen, and sometimes he just wants to tell a human story. Like he doesn't always want to be this metaphor riddled director. He's made some movies that are pretty on the nose,
Yeah.
and bringing this up, if Seligman is our proxy, it's somebody trying to find a meaning in every single aspect of the film, and it's like, dude, we just got started. We don't need to be thinking about that kind of shit yet. Just let them talk.
I actually like that because like it's almost like the if you're annoyed, it's kind of the point, which I think so. You know, as much as I've been kind of critical, and I'll be especially critical during volume two, I think a lot of the things I'm critical of in this movie are intentional. I think Lars is a very smart individual. I think he's very aware of the emotions he's bringing out, and and for many of them, it's completely the point. It's 100% the point.
Hmm.
It just makes it hard for me to connect as much as I have with a lot of his other films. And I think he'll use like a lot of these elements when we get to Jack here in a little while that he's just basically repurposing to make that story. And
Yeah.
I think they work better there for me
Yep.
than they necessarily work here.
Um, I have one more structure question before we start getting into like famous favorite scenes and some of that kind of stuff. Have either one of y'all by chance read Justine or parts of Justine from the Marquis de Sade?
I
No.
have not.
Okay, I have not either. I was gonna try to get to it, and I saw it was like 4,000 pages or something, so then I did not get to it.
All you know is the
Um,
light reading before bed.
yeah, exactly. But apparently this follows that structure pretty closely. Where Justine leans a little bit more. I mean, again, this is I have not read it, but apparently it focuses on a girl between the age of 12 and 26, and it focuses much more on. So the Marquis de Sade was interested in the abuse of the Catholic Church, the abuse of authority in Rome, I guess, or whatever it was written, like in the governing bodies of those times, and how this poor girl was treated and abused and like raped by every man in her life that she went to for help. So it's different than this one, Nymphomaniac in tone, but apparently the structure is the same. And I read somewhere that he's expressed that he would love to be considered this generation's Marquis de Sade, which, again, it's hard to know with him if he's just kind of messing around or if he means that. But I actually can kind of see it in the same way if he's going to make comments like that. He is he's willing to dive into controversy, I think, with equal, fervor that the Marquis de Sade did, even if maybe he's not focused so much on sodomy, like the Sade, like the Marquis, or like the Sade or whatever.
Interesting.
Um,
All of that is referenced in so many different places. I definitely need to study up on it eventually.
yeah, I have that on my list to like one day I'll get to it as well. I mean, it's a pretty heavy lift. It's not like light reading. Um, but Severin
And
has
that's
a
the one thing I'll give him a lot of credit for too. Is I'm sure, and this is one thing that doesn't annoy me. I think he actually does it pretty well, to where he references things. Sometimes it's on the nose, sometimes it's a little bit more subtle at times, but he actually seems to know the material well, at least like the material I'm aware of, and watching him how he uses it. He seems to actually understand it. It isn't just like look how smart I am because I read this 4,000 page book that's probably better used as a paperweight than it is reading material. But he's read it and he probably enjoys it better than I would. But it is fascinating. I think he is actually pretty good at that.
yeah, I think so. You remember the character of B, who runs along with Joe when they're teenagers?
Yes.
Yes.
She was saying that when he writes this language that most of the time they end up using, but she was saying that when they film, he'll like for a lot of these, for both Stacey Martin and for B, it was their first film, and so he'll use this like language and he'll say like, okay, they'll like run through the scene once, and he'll say, okay, now do it again, but in your own words. And they're like, what? Like, how can I possibly do this in my own words? Um, and sometimes he'll even use those takes if they're good, but most of the time they use his takes. But in his head, everybody is like read, well read like him, and everybody is as intelligent as him, and it's just like a bunch of people that are super brainiacs, like running around trying to make movies together. Seems like a lot of pressure, though. It'd be like, and not quite this. I mean, I'm not trying to elevate him too much, but it'd be like getting through something of Shakespeare, and then Shakespeare being like, "Okay, now do it, but in your own words." I was like, oh, wait, I'm not gonna do that, man.
All right, guys, time to post for the silly one.
Yeah, exactly.
Any Oh, I guess one thing we should talk about, because we all three referenced it before we move on. I think all of us agree that the Mrs. H scene is the best scene in the film.
It's
I'm
pretty
guessing.
great. Yeah. Acting is top notch. I thought it brought some actual levity. The cringe from that scene was palpable.
Oh, so much
Um,
secondhand embarrassment. It is so
yeah.
high.
Uh,
Um,
I
and
thought it was bad enough, and then her next lover showed up, and you're like, "Oh, here we go. It's getting worse."
it's almost like, just because me and you, Chris, watched that Boss of It All, like it almost has like that type of cringy humor. Of course, this is a lot more heavy. This isn't just some dude pretending to be the boss.
Right,
But,
right, right, right.
this is actual weight to it. But everything that could go wrong in that scene pretty much goes wrong, and it's almost done to for a level of absurdity.
Right.
But you're also watching these kids pretty much have their lives ruined right in front of you, and there's just nothing anybody can do about it, and it just keeps getting worse and worse by the second. And that's one of the things I thought they did really well. They did not do any back and forth that I remember in that scene of going back to them talking. He really let that scene play out,
Yep.
and all the weight and what you thought about it was just all there. And maybe that's where I struggle a bit, where I think, I would kind of wish the whole movie was more like this, because it's not, scene happens and they're telling me what it means. um I get to just absorb it. I get to like come to a lot of conclusions myself and things like, and they do talk about it afterwards, and I don't mind that. I actually think the discussion they have afterwards is really good, and I think it's very interesting. But I'm so glad that scene just plays out from beginning to end. Just lets it breathe.
Yeah, I was shocked with the humor in that scene, and honestly, I was kind of shocked with the amount of humor in all of part one. Which there's a few scenes that I don't know, like Lars kind of going outside of his normal zone in this part one took me off guard. Like the random needle drop of Bad to the Bone
Yeah.
threw me off so much. I enjoyed it.
Yeah.
I think it fit so well, but man, I was not ready for that in the least bit.
Is it the end of part one or the end of part two where it's some like metal rock band that plays like as
It's a,
soon as the
yeah.
credits hit?
It's the beginning of part one and then the end of part two,
Okay.
I
Because
think.
I was, when it hits that credit, I almost thought it was pretty funny. Like I think that was the point. It was supposed to be like kind of wacky, but
Yeah.
just like something happens, like boom, heavy metal.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah. No, that had like a Michelle Haneke does that in Funny Games too, right? That's how he starts
Yep.
Funny Games.
Yeah, yeah.
It's almost kind of setting the tone a little bit. Um, yeah, I think I was surprised. I don't typically like. I think by far, sorry. So by far my favorite scene was the Uma Thurman scene. I think that's like, you know, she's not. I don't know that like in casual circles, how if she people think about her as being able to pull off a scene like that. I think of her more as like a genre actor, you know.
I
Maybe
think it's
just
like one of those things where she never really got the opportunity before this.
okay.
And I feel like that was a lot of it. Like I think when she does get to do stuff like this, she tends to do it really well. But I mean,
Yeah,
she's also the bride in Kill Bill, and I think that's what
exactly.
immediately people think about. I
And
mean,
she's awesome in that too.
yeah, yeah, she's good. She knows what she's doing. But yeah, I mean, it's kind of like, I wish she would do more of that here. I'm glad she got her opportunity to do this with Von Trier. She does this scene. She has one scene in the film we'll talk about after the next one, and she's good and she's great in both of them.
Yeah,
So it would be nice if she kind of got those opportunities more.
I agree. The other favorite thing from this for me, something that carries through, I think he does a good job. If you take away all the noise in this, I think there's a few themes that jump out. And I'm not going to say am good at picking up on all of them, but the way that she looks at Jerome, I think, is an interesting piece of this movie. They can kind of get lost in everything else that's going on. But, as the story goes on in volume one, and I'll just kind of leave it there for now, as she develops feeling for Jerome, it's this interesting thing where we see her develop feelings for somebody outside of sex with them, right? And it, I don't really know exactly what he's trying to say with it. Maybe we can kind of close that thought when we get to volume two. But it's the only person in her life that seems to have broken through her addiction or her personality or her mental health situation, like however you want to describe it, because I think the movie certainly looks at it from a couple different angles, right? Whether it's an addiction or whether it's just sort of who she is or whatever, if she's part of original sin, even with some of the dreams she's had, whatever. But like there's
Yeah,
this
I
one
think
thing that breaks through it.
yeah, I was sitting here thinking about this too, since I did watch these two and then Jack right afterwards. I think the way I kind of read it going back like retroactively is, this is, she talks about things so clinically. Her father was a doctor, and she thinks that things very matter of fact. And then we get to Jack later on, where he's going to talk about things more artistically, more philosophically, and things like that. And this idea of love is, I think I don't remember exact quote she uses, but she talks about it, and in a way where love, I think she says something like love is just lust with jealousy added. Almost like love doesn't
Right,
exist. And then
right, right,
you'll get into Jack, where it's art is love. It's that is, it's almost like a something you can't describe. It's not something you can find tangible. It's more than our comprehension, sort of thing, just like art is, or anything like that.
right.
And I feel like that's kind of what he's going for, in a way, like this idea that she thinks she's got it figured out, and in reality you can't figure everything out. I think that's a big theme with a lot of what he does, like when we talk about melancholia and stuff, where you can try your best to understand it, and for a lot of things we do seem to understand it until we don't, and then we have no real explanation for it.
For me, that's the perfect ending about volume one, because I think that theme carries over well. Anything else that y'all want to say about it? Otherwise, I think that's a great stopping point.
I think the only thing that I think we should probably mention from volume one is the hospital scene, especially if Joe is proxy of Lars von Trier, having all of this death happen in front of her and watching her father, you know, going through this awful end essentially. And
Hmm.
after all that, she's the point of the scene is to show us that she is turned on by all of that,
Mm,
which is, I mean, it's deeply disturbing for most people watching that. And so when you're looking at that as a proxy of Lars, I mean, there's still a lot of perverted thoughts that happen through depression, and he definitely wants to make that human side still be represented. It seemed like to me.
Yeah, and I think part of it is, it's almost like, a lot of times, and this will go more into volume two, where she goes to talk to a group and get help, try to get help for this, that she doesn't really see it necessarily as something that need help. But in a lot of ways, I think that's the kind of do the opposite. It like highlights this idea that, after what happens with her father, she is almost just trying to get a dopamine hit, which I think is a common problem, where
Yep.
some people drink, some people do drugs, some people do something just to feel a little bit better. And it's went from she does it because she enjoys it, to she does it because it's the only way she can kind of get through.
Right.
It's
Exactly.
almost like that switch of addiction.
Yep.
Well, I think naturally the only place we can go after volume one is to volume two. No reason to skip ahead, I guess. So, for volume two, we're going to be talking about the continuation of Joe's sexual dictated life, delves into the darker aspects of her adult life, and what led to her being in that guy's care, Stellan Skarsgård's care. So I'll actually start a little bit on this one. Actually, no, I want to get the ranking. So we're in relation to the first one. Where does this one rank? Is it higher, lower, same, about the same place, or do they rank them together?
Yeah, they rank them together. So
Okay.
this is 8134. I mean, volume one was 8134, and this is 8135. So
Okay. I guess
yeah,
that makes sense. It would be kind of weird if they weren't, but yeah, okay. Gotcha.
I
Okay.
do think there's a difference in quality between the two, but
Same.
it would be hard to separate them, I guess.
Yeah. So for me, I think in a lot of ways, this movie is slightly better in certain aspects. Like I think the platonic friendship they have is much better here. It feels much more natural. And then the ending happens, and I won't spoil it yet. We'll talk about it. It is probably in my top five least favorite endings of a movie. I think it is fucking terrible. I think it's an awful ending, and I hate it. And it makes me rank this movie much lower just because of the way it ends. But I will leave it there for now.
Tell us how you really feel, Zach.
Yeah. We'll get to the real rant later.
Ryan, since you kicked this off last time, you want to jump in here? How was volume two for you?
For me, this is a slight step down, actually. I preferred the first one quite a bit. This one felt a lot more disjointed. I think I felt a little more connection with the younger character of Joe. So the changeover to the more mature in her age, Joe, just didn't affect me the exact same way. I was happy with the character development through and through. The shocking scenes in part two, primarily the floor of the clinic scene, um, that I don't know, they felt a little more out of place, although still very human and still very relevant, unfortunately. But yeah, I look at this as um basically just a continuation of the despair and of a spiral, spiral downward of somebody that is struggling inward and outwardly with their life. And this one starts in a much more depressing place for her because she has just reported to us that she has lost all of her feeling, and she's now trying to grapple with that. But yeah, I definitely preferred the first one to this one.
Chris, yourself?
It's so complicated, right? Because um, the character of Joe goes through, I think, a larger kind of transformation in part two. I think her character becomes more nuanced in part two, right? I think part one was in a weird way almost like a celebration of sex, although that's not entirely fair. But like, it's a much more fun, lighthearted view of being an nymphomaniac. And then I think volume two is more of like the dark side of it. And it's volume two where she has her son, right? And he walks off the edge, or is that the end of volume one? No, no, that's volume two.
Yeah, it's volume two. It's volume two.
Yeah. So like, it's interesting because now there's some other things coming into the story here. Like for example, that scene is a scene for what's it called? A shot for shot remake of the beginning of Antichrist, right? Except it ends slightly differently. And so you see your theory about the audience proxy, I think, is interesting, Ryan, because I think we're starting to see Von Trier's world almost get more complicated and muddled and complex here. If this is a proxy for him as well, I think he's bringing in elements from his previous films. There's much more pain and hurt in this one. And I think it's the way that it ends, which I know we'll get to in a second. It ends up as a very nihilistic film. Like there's no, his mind, I don't think there's any real redemption for people. And so it's an interesting take on this after spending 5.5 hours with someone. So I liked it less. I just can't figure out if it's that if it was better and I'm just, you know, wrestling with how I felt about it, or if it was worse as a film kind of filmmaking perspective. I don't know exactly where I sit yet, but I know I didn't enjoy watching it as much. Zach, what about you outside of the ending?
You know what? I think a good way to talk about this is there's one thing I want somebody here to explain it to me because I think it is the dumbest thing on the planet. And you both may have seen it in my review. I don't know if you did or not on Letterbox. So basically, she goes and works for a criminal organization, and her
Yeah, yeah.
superpower is having sex with people. I can't, I can't, I can't, I can't
No,
deal with what that is.
I
Like,
think, well, Ryan, I don't know if you have anything. I think that's a slight misreading of the scene. Well, let me say I read it differently. Let me say it that way. So maybe you'll convince me to see it your way. But I don't know, Ryan, if there's anything before I jump in.
No, go right ahead, please.
Okay. I took it slightly differently, Zach. I think she gave that one guy a blowjob. That's what you're talking about, right?
yeah, but even
Um,
before then, she's like talking about, trying to figure out like what gets them off and things like that. So to me, that kind of insinuates this isn't the only time she's done things like this.
so the way that I interpreted that, because I actually like that scene a lot. Um, the reason I liked it is because I think she was able, sex was the way that she was able to understand humanity at a level that other people weren't. And so she was able to be good at that job because she was able to speak to like base desires in people. And so she was able to manipulate that to get confessions out of them because in Von Trier's mind, I think, and in Joe's mind, everybody has a perversion. And so she was just going through different perversions until she got a rise out of that guy. And then she just like pushed down on that to like get him to confess because he didn't want to even like really think about it himself, right? That's how I kind of interpreted that scene.
And it's spot on with how I thought of it too.
Okay.
And maybe that is the intention. It just that whole subplot comes off as like odd to me because then they're talking about like the successor thing, which is when we get into Mia Goth's character, and it's just like I don't even fully understand what I'm to get out of this. Like
So
what all this even really means or what it's trying to say. Like, of course, they have the conversation about the idea that pedophilia is chastised because of the people who act on it when many don't, and they're scared to even get help for it. I get all that. That's all great. It's a great conversation. It's very interesting. It's very thought provoking. I like that discussion that happens afterwards. It's kind of the opposite issue I had with volume one, where I really didn't like the discussion scenes as much, and I wish they had just let it play like the Mrs. H scenes. And in
uh,
this one, I actually really hate a lot of the what's going on in the past and actually enjoy their discussions
yeah.
and their developing friendship of like opposite ideas a lot more.
So to come back to your side now, I think that as much as I love Willem Dafoe, and I think he was fine in this movie, I think if you want to make a complaint that Ventura writes for convenience or like is too convenient in his writing and just adds things in to further the story without it necessarily being logical that it goes there. I think William Dafoe's storyline and then Mia Goth's storyline is a good example of that. Like that whole
Yeah, like
storyline is
and
just there for convenience, right?
and by the end it becomes so centralized where it's just kind of
Hmm.
like I guess what you're talking about, where it almost feels like you're rode in a corner. It's like, okay, well, how did she get there? Well, I've got to explain that. And
Hmm.
maybe I'm not gonna speculate on how, if this was outlined or nothing like that. But to me, as like an audience watching it, it kind of feels like I need to explain this because that's how we started the movie, was I was going to lead up to this explanation.
Yeah,
And maybe I just don't necessarily find the explanation satisfactory necessarily.
yeah, yeah. That's the knock I have on Volume Two is that storyline essentially. Um,
Because as fucked
you
up
know,
as it is to say it, the abortion storyline is way more interesting. Like the entire time she's doing there's, for people who haven't seen it, there's a scene where she finds out she's pregnant. She does not want the baby. She makes it very clear she has no interest in the child. They basically say, well, we don't know if you're sure, so we're not going to give you the abortion right. So she just does it herself. I think all that is way more interesting. I think it's very well done. I think it's the most captivating stuff in the movie, for me, at least for the past stuff.
Yeah. I'm waiting a little bit just in case you want to jump in, Ryan. I hate to keep jumping in over you.
Well, the only thing I'll really say is there's the old saying that a perfect movie is a movie that can't be added to or subtracted from. And I feel like with part two of this, there's quite a lot that you could subtract, and this movie would hit in all the same ways that you're aiming for. I feel like there are multiple scenes that are unnecessary to drive the plot. I think that um, for Zach's point, the abortion scene is it hits hard. It's supposed to, obviously, and I feel like it doesn't have the gravity that it should because we transition away from it so quickly. And not much is spent afterwards. With either the audience or with our main character Joe. Um, Not necessarily discussing it because some people don't need to discuss it and they're done with it the moment that it's ready, and she clearly wanted it. But just feeling the gravity of all that we were just witness to, I think is the biggest thing. We don't have a whole lot of moments with that, and instead, like the whole Willem Dafoe thing, to be quite honest, I felt like it could have been completely removed from the film, and
Yeah.
we just plain did not need it at all.
Yeah.
Because I mean, you can just have it by the end. That I mean, if you need to get her to that point where she gets brought home so she can tell the story. I mean, she's putting herself in riskier situations
Right.
by the day. It could have just been a relation that went badly, and that
Exactly.
would have been fine. You wouldn't have needed the other stuff, and the
No,
audience would accept it.
I was thinking about this. So, the scenes where she was experimenting with BDSM, right?
Mhm.
That she could have pushed herself too far with that guy. He beats her up and leaves her out on the street, and that's it. Like,
I
you
think the
know,
only risk you have with that, which I don't disagree with you, I don't think that's necessarily a bad way to go. I think then the worry you might have if you're Von Trier in this is to make a community kind of perpetuate an idea for a
Yes.
community that isn't necessarily there, that people in BDSM are assholes or abusers or things like that, when that is, from my understanding, is not necessarily hooked into reality. It's more of a perception, and
Well
maybe it
said.
was a worry of pushing that perception too far in something
okay,
like this.
okay, all right, yeah, fair, fair, fair. Whatever it is. I mean, I
But
just think,
I get what you're saying, and I don't necessarily disagree, because I think it's a natural place to go. Like we talk about, what this, I think this is a good time for Chris, where we talked about this plenty. He brings it to its logical conclusion, and I feel like this is the time he did not.
yeah,
I really feel like it didn't feel like the conclusion, that it doesn't fit. It doesn't really work for me for whatever reason.
yeah,
See, and this is where I'm gonna, not to be too contrary. I think the ending for this is brilliant. I was shocked that he was subversive as he was in that ending, and very. I don't want to say happy because that's a weird word to describe this, but I was very um, impressed that the director would choose to end the movie in a completely different direction than anybody could have written, probably for that.
Do we want to go ahead and just put the spoiler alert in and kind of discuss that ending, or you think we're good to do that?
I'm wondering if it's such a, yeah, I guess this would necessitate a spoiler warning. Yeah, just because, like you said, it is unexpected. So, sure, sure.
Yeah, so we're gonna go ahead and talk about the ending of this film. You've kind of heard where we stand on it. I think they're much more positive than I am. I still say check both of them out. They're very interesting movies. I have my hang-ups with them, but go watch them. And the ending is surprising. So skip ahead to when we get to Jack if you do not want to be spoiled. So anyway, I guess how should we do this? I guess
Yeah, just go
we
for it.
can go through what the ending is. So basically, she finishes telling the story. She goes to bed, and Stellan Skarsgård attempts to essentially sexually assault her, and she ends up shooting him, and the movie ends.
You know
So,
what? The only thing we should probably add, we haven't talked about it, is that he claims to be asexual in the movie
yes,
And a virgin.
and a
yes,
virgin.
yes.
And we, you know, it's certainly not the first time that I've seen Stellan's Skarsgård, but you know, it's we see his Skarsgård full bare, and and then she wakes up as he's trying to do what he wants to do, I guess, because he sees her sleeping with no underwear, so he sees his chance.
Yeah, and I mean, okay, so I'm gonna give the positive take of this. This is probably gonna be the most positive about the ending. I do think the idea is very interesting, and I think the idea that just because she slept with a bunch of men does not give anyone else the right to do
Right,
that. She
right.
still has full autonomy of who she is, what
That's
she
right.
wants, and things like that. That's all fine. That's all great. I like that. I don't like how we get there. So I'm going to give a little bit of background about myself. So at least people who want to just write this off as being personally biased, you're absolutely free to do that. I think it's important for me to talk about one of my biggest hangups in film. So I've had the same best friend since I was in kindergarten. She is a girl. We have been friends for 25 years now. And one of the biggest annoyances in my life is the constant questions if we're dating, or, this idea that men and women cannot be friends, or, at least not close friends, or things like that. One always has like an ulterior motive. It's a very big annoyance for me. Platonic relationships between the opposite sex is something that is wholly underrepresented in film. If there is a male and female friendship, they are going to get into it, blah, blah, blah. I've accepted this as much as I can, but the reason it particularly pisses me off in volume two is we do have like this budding sort of friendship. They're very different. They really couldn't be more different in their output, but I feel like, especially in volume two, we start seeing this interesting, platonic relationship building, and then just feels so out of character when Skarsgård's character comes in and basically attempts to rape her. And it's like, why is this a thing? Why are we doing this? Like, it feels so out of left field. It
Yeah.
feels, and I'm sure that's the point, but it's just like, what am I supposed to get out of that? What do you want me to feel by the end of this? I don't mind feeling bad. I just want to understand why I'm feeling bad.
Yeah.
Chris, you want to go ahead first?
There's an idea that I'm trying to form. I can certainly do it live, but otherwise, go ahead because I just the way you phrased that, Zach, gave me an idea. I'm trying to put some words around. So go ahead, Ryan, and I'll jump in just a second.
So again, letting Lars off the hook here with the whole audience interpretation being Seligman and Joe being Lars. The way that I'm looking at this as a complete um, like criticism of the audience, that even no matter how much they have laid the groundwork in the 5.5 hours of cinema before this, we are still going to have asinine responses from people that watch this and don't get the tale at the heart of this about being careful with these things, like treating this as like a cautionary tale. And when you are seeing this all come to a head at the end here, I mean, there's certain lines that Seligman uses. There's one point he even says, "But you've slept with hundreds of men." Like, who cares if you just add one more to that number? And there, I guarantee you, there have been thousands of people that have seen this movie and have gone down and flippantly said something like, "Oh, she's such a whore." Just, I mean, so many people have been raised to respond that way that they have no idea, what they're saying about a person. And so when you have the audience that is saying these things flippantly and will look at this, even though this story is awful and has so many negative twists and turns, somebody is going to be titillated by it. Somebody's going to be turned on by it. And so at the end, the audience might step in and do with it what they may, even though that's not the point of this whatsoever.
So, yeah, it's an interesting. I don't know. I guess we're gonna come up with three different theories, and we can figure out if they all make sense or debate over which one is right. um, I was just stuck on this idea of this movie being a battle, although that's not the right word, but a dialogue between logos and eros, right? Between logic and passion, between like her version of hell was never being able to feel pleasure again, and his version of hell was never being able to read again, right? So pure raw intellect versus pure unfiltered raw passion and pleasure, I guess, right? And if you think of it in that way, their dialogue and their conversation is like this kind of discussion between eros and logos. Then I think one reading of the ending could be something that Joe says throughout the movie, right? If she's representing pleasure, the reason that she calls everybody hypocrites in the 12-step program is they're using their brain and the logic to allow themselves to not be true to what they want, right? Like she calls out the woman who's overweight by saying, you just are just stuffing yourself full of something, whether it's like sex or whether it's food, like you just have to be stuffed, but just admit it to yourself, right? She calls out the other woman for being like hypocritical, and or I guess there's three women in total she calls out for being hypocritical, and basically her point is saying like you're shutting off your true self. You're not being honest about who you are. So I think it's an extremely cynical view, by the way. I'm not defending the viewpoint, but I think in Joe's world, everybody's lying who's saying they don't want sex. She even makes the comment, right? If a woman says that she doesn't want to sleep with a black guy, like she's lying, right? She doesn't use that term, but like she, so many times she presses into like this idea that like we have to know who we are and we have to be honest with who we are, and people aren't typically honest with who they are. And I think in the end we see her logic winning out, because Seligman, as much as he professes to be a man of literature and asexual and not a man of passion, he still sees an opportunity to test it out. And like he doesn't get off the hook saying it's just a curiosity, right? You can't take an intellectual curiosity to the extent that he does. That's not right. No, we can't let him get away with that. Like he wanted her, right? There's something in that story that turned him on. That's the reason he came back, not because he was curious, as if it was like another book to read. So I think it's a way of one possible. I don't know. Again, like I'm just fleshing this idea out now, but like one possible reading of this could be the fact that Eros wins over Logos when it comes down to it.
That is possible.
And it would excuse. See, this is the thing, though, like the reason that you didn't like it, Zach, I think is similar to why I struggle with the talking about it, because I do think he writes so much for convenience sometimes. And this is, in the ending, the way that it was laid out, I was just like, ugh, like so convenient.
Yeah, I think that's one of the things that bothered me, because I don't, I mentioned it when I started. I don't dislike the idea that she's, just because she slept with a bunch of dudes doesn't mean she doesn't have a right to say no, or, and somebody had their feelings hurt and she feels like she has to. That's not what it is. I think if that was explored through a different character, it would make more sense to me, because we are so established to him as a character and things like that. And then it just makes me wonder, as like, is Lars trying to just basically say asexuality is not a real thing? Like, then maybe that's his viewpoint, and I guess fair enough, but it's also kind of I don't know, maybe it's because the world's changed in the last 10 years regarding like how we view sexuality and things like that. Asexuality, I think, is a little bit more accepted now than it was then, but it's all so odd to look back on to how he writes that character, because I feel like it's very consistent up until the last moment. And maybe that's the point. Maybe it's not supposed to be consistent, but I just struggle to like grasp it, I guess, like to logic it in my mind to make sense.
You, you know, here's the thing that bothers me. Now that you're talking about it, I can pinpoint the exact moment that bothers me. If he does that same thing before he leaves the room, I think I'm okay with it. But by leaving the room, thinking about it, waiting for her to come be asleep, coming in, and then doing that, I don't like that.
Yeah, like there's it's kind of like in criminal law when we talk about heat of passion. There's this idea of, if you come home, your wife, who whatever's happening, wife's cheating on you with somebody, and you shoot them both, right then and there, it's a heat of passion murder. If
Mm-hmm.
you walk out to your truck and go get a gun, it can be looked at as first degree murder, because that moment to think about your decisions, that sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a thing that feels so difficult here, because like it, I don't know, I can't find the right words, and I'm afraid of going in circles. And I think a lot of it comes down to me not like it's it's just one of those endings that's just not gonna necessarily work for me. And it probably is one that just goes over my head, if I'm being like honest with myself. Like, it's one where I'm like, I'm sure he has something great to say. I would even say Ryan probably has like a really great point on what the ending is trying to explore. And it's like my mind won't grab hold of it. It's just like something is just like itching at me, I guess.
The only like logic part that I've been holding on to that I was going to save for the right moment to bring up here is
That was excellent. Yeah, I completely agree.
the uh the bit of information that we get that he is asexual and a virgin, and they highlight that specifically at the beginning of part two. He is using that as an explanation for his feeling that he is the best person to give a non-biased reaction to this.
That's right.
And by the end, if you are somebody that is literally the audience, a lot of people look at any situation. And this is, again, a small leap in logic, but if you look at any situation, when we hear in many of these stories that any character is a virgin, it is never meant to be a matter of fact moment. It is meant to lead into, well, how do we get them to lose that?
Mm-hmm. That's true.
Always in cinema, forever.
True.
And so in this situation, if we, the audience, are the Seligman surrogate, you could theoretically be looking at this as, well, like the empathetic way for me to feel is, well, he has to lose his virginity, right? And so even after all of this, even after he has stated definitively that he's asexual and that she's not shown any interest in him, despite being an nymphomaniac, again, I'll lean back to a lot of the audience could still be titillated in a way that wants to see him lose his virginity because of a logical assumption that when a character states that they're a virgin, that they literally want to lose that title, even though he's kind of already said he's fine with it. And so that's where I see the ending here subvert everything that we've gone through, part one and part two. And yes, it does come out of left field. I'm not defending that it doesn't, because it clearly does. But I think it leads to more questions, which can be a good thing about this ending specifically. And without that type of a divisive ending, we wouldn't be having this conversation.
Right.
Yeah, it's definitely like, I mean, as far as like MO here, this is Lars in the sense that it is provocative, and
Right.
that's its intention. I think we get more of the trolley Lars when we get to the interesting conversation she has about how you can refer to black people. That when I watched it, I was like, yeah, I think he just did that simply to troll with people. Like, seems like a very humorous thing to even like bring up.
Well,
So
especially after Manderley, right? That might have been his response to Manderley.
yeah, it really could have been because we're sitting
Yeah.
there and we're like, I'm just like, oh, okay, this is a cool way to go, I guess.
Yeah,
Um,
Ryan, he in Ryan in Manderley, he outdoes Tarantino by as white man using the N-word.
Huh.
And he certainly came under some heat for it. But anyways, that's kind of what we're talking about. That could have been
I'm not
his,
surprised.
yes, could have been his
Mandalay is a
response to it.
wild movie. It's not a good movie, but it is wild.
Yeah. His whole filmography is just so interesting, man. Yeah, yeah, anyways, we'll get to that in a second after Jack. But um sorry, did I interrupt you?
No, I think we're trying to figure out where to go next because, like, I mean, it is the admitted, like, as negative as I've been, and I have things I like. I have things I like about this movie. As negative as I've been, um, it does remain interesting all the way through. I'm not gonna. I've seen this movie twice. I saw this movie for the first time when I was in college. I can tell you right then, I didn't get anything that happened then. And I feel like as someone who's 30 now, I understand even less of it. So I don't know. I don't have answers here.
Yeah. Ryan, where this is the first time you'd seen these?
I had I think I had started the first one, but literally like I don't think I viewed maybe 30 minutes the first time, and just something came up and I never got to finish it. So yeah, this is the first time full watch of both.
You're like, do I really want to see Shia LaBeouf's penis? Am I in that right frame of mind to accept that?
I'm just amazed that we have gone through discussion on two films. This is the first time we've said the word Shia LaBeouf, and nobody has used the word stunt cock yet either.
Do you think it's the Stunkak?
I'm not sure. I wouldn't be surprised necessarily.
I did read
It's
that
a nice penis.
apparently, like when he was trying to get the part, he sent Lars a sex tape that he had done with his girlfriend,
Yep, I read
and I'm
that too.
like, that is that is the most Shia like thing I've ever heard for how you get a job. Like Jesus.
That's up there with Isabella Johnny cutting herself before the audition for Possession, right?
Yeah, and that at least that one kind of makes sense to me. Like I'm like, yeah, you got to
For
like
sure.
prove. It's like going to Herzog and not doing something a little crazy where he has to control you. You just it's part of it.
You
That
gotta,
one's just like okay,
he's trying to stand out, right?
yeah, it's like okay, sure. That's,
Uh, that actually brings up one question I had for y'all. But is there? I am not a student of classical music. Is there any chance that either one of y'all has spent any time studying classical music?
I like classical music. I wouldn't say I've ever studied it, and I could not identify it off the cuff.
It's okay. Ryan,
I've studied ever so minute amounts of it, not enough to give a proper answer here for
okay.
anything.
The only reason I'm asking is obviously there's that one scene where they break down polyphony, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I
And they
can't
break.
read music for shit, so I definitely couldn't do that.
Well, I'm interested to see because the way that she relates to the idea of polyphony, which, to be fair, is very beautiful when it's done live. They briefly show that one cutaway to a choir, but the concept of having three separate songs come together as one song and they make sense as one song is a pretty powerful thing to witness. Some of the indie rock bands of like Typhoon tries it a little bit. There's a few Maps and Atlases, Ryan, if you remember them. That there's some bands that try it on some level, where each instrument's kind of doing its own thing and they come together. But obviously, nobody's pulled it off to the level of like a Bach or whatever, Beethoven or whatever they were saying. But I wasn't like so many things in a Von Trier movie. They're trying to figure out like I'm trying to figure out the metaphor, and that whole section I struggled with a little bit. So she talks about the bass as the guy that is just solely focused on her pleasure. Then she talks about like I forget, like the other middle part, which is that guy who's where she's solely focused on his pleasure. And so as they come together, like she's getting pleasure and then her partner's getting pleasure. And then there's Jerome that comes in as like cantor firmus or whatever they say that final term is, where it's like the harmony of everything, the thing that brings her whole life back together, right? And it was the reason I bring it up is because there's this through line that goes through the entire story where Jerome was a bad sexual partner to her when she was 15 or whatever. Like he 3 pumps, right? And then 5 pumps, and then he was out and he left her just to like go home on her bike, right? But she became obsessed with this guy as time went on, and he ultimately was the cause of her like most painful moment, right? So like it kind of bookended on like her first disappointment, then like this huge arc where she kind of fell for this guy, then she was delayed that gratification, then they had their moment together, then for some unexplained reason she was the cause of their demise when she lost sensation in her clitoris, and then they met back up and he was with another girl, which again is that weird storyline with Mia Goth, right? But then that caused her the ultimate pain where she was ready to kill for the first time in her life. So like this, I don't know how that fugue or that like polyphony story kind of plays into her story, but it seems like Jerome is at the center of like her arc. And I was curious if y'all like thought at all about the Jerome storyline, because I'm not a huge fan of Shia LaBeouf. I thought he was fine in this movie.
His accent was odd.
Yeah, it was.
Yeah, it wasn't
Uh,
great.
but it obviously meant a lot to her, right? Like he was like everything to her in some ways.
Well, she's kind of, I guess for him, he's kind of the retort to a lot of her worldview, like where she talks about, like, she tells that one girl, which they play several times, where she tells him, love is like the key to sex and things like that, where
Right.
she rejects that idea. She completely rejects it. But time and time again, her worldview is kind of broken by him.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And I feel like that's really where he comes in. Everyone else is going through the motion, but for whatever reason, this like breaks a cog in the machine of her mind in that sort of way.
Yeah. I like Shia LaBeouf quite a bit, actually. I thought he was fine here. I don't think he stands out any way, negative or positive. I think the storyline is great, and just reminded me of something that I forgot to bring up about the ending as well. Um, we watch Joe attempt to kill him, and she doesn't know how the gun works. And what's crazy is that we have Seligman teach her how to use the gun that eventually kills him, and I
Mm-hmm.
think that is important to tie into the end there too. But I'm kind of changing the plot from what we were talking about to that again. So just want to throw that out there, that was something I found interesting.
No, no, no. It's a good call out. Yeah, because she finally understands why the gun didn't fire because of his response, right?
Yep.
I don't know. I think I'll just leave it at that. I think Zach, what you said is kind of where my mind was going a little bit. It seems like, Von Trier does this thing in Nymphomaniac where he contradicts himself a lot. And like he uses, I think, Seligman and Joe to contradict each other a lot. And I'm assuming that it means it's kind of like the contradiction he feels in himself as well. But, he Seligman is not correct even though he's kind. And then Joe is not correct, even though she's living at her most honest self. Even in that, like, she still kind of is a hypocrite on some level, right? Because she still, at the end of the day, she would be happy if her sexual organs had not stopped bringing herself pleasure. She probably would have died happy with Jerome, right? I mean,
Yep.
it's a big leap, but like in the sense of the story, she was happy finally until her own body caused the problem.
Right.
So even in that, there's a bit of a contradiction, and to all the things, like you were saying, that's all the things she said. Anyways, if his point is that the human brain is complex and his mind is complex, I think he nailed it at least at that part.
Yeah, and there's one thing while you were talking, I just kind of thought about too, where there's that part where we talk about that he's kind of the intellectual type, and then of course the one time he's not is when they bring up the pedophile guy who isn't like an acting pedophile. He's someone who maybe it's deep down in him, or
Hmm.
he's repressed these feelings, or
Hmm.
whatever,
Hmm.
what have you
Hmm.
on that. And he acts very impulsive towards that. And she brings out that he's not logical about it. And, now kind of thinking about the ending, I guess, if it is a bit of projection, like, he gets so angry because maybe he's not, obviously, I'm not saying he's a pedophile, but I think maybe he's seen something in himself that he doesn't want to necessarily admit, like, that he's capable of horrible things that involve this sort of thing. I don't know. I have no like deeper thoughts on it. I just kind of think it's interesting to think back to the kind of his two instances of being not the logical guy, or kind of connected in that sense.
Yeah, right. You, you can't fully ever be logical, and you can't ever fully just like basically like she's kind of like that concept of id. I forget
Yeah.
who created that but she's sort of like id, right? Just unfiltered, raw, like id. And so you need both, I guess.
Do we have any final thoughts, Ryan? Do you have anything you want to bring up before we move on to our last movie?
I don't think so. Just what we've said, that they are good movies, and I would say people should watch them.
Chris, any final things from you?
Yeah, yeah. There's so much. There's like 10 other things I wrote down, but I don't want to cover them all. I think what I'll just say is, um, we have now seen, I think, somebody who has like he when he's not filming. Now we know he was struggling with this kind of like degenerative condition, right? And there's an interesting interview around Jack, which came out, was it 2017?
18.
18?
Mm-hmm.
Where he actually had to hold his hands down. The one time in the interview he picked his hands up, they were shaking quite a bit. So,
Yeah, it's been very sad. It's definitely been a sad thing to see.
yeah. So he is fighting with like all these demons when he's not making movies, right? And I think there's something that I find, it's a weird word to use for these movies like Antichrist and Nymphomania, yeah, Nymphomaniac. But like, I think there's something beautiful in the way that we're getting a glimpse into somebody who's like definitely an artist. You can say whether or not, whatever qualifiers you want to put on that term, he's definitely an artist, right? And we're getting this glimpse into somebody who has at least enough self awareness to understand the things about him that are complicated and maybe people hate, and is willing to put those on film and let people wrestle with them and discuss them and debate them. And I'm honestly like, I respect him a lot for that. I don't think, like we talk about Adam, and I've mentioned Holly a few times, like there are people that will not watch his movies, and that's fine, right? Like, and for the Adams of the world, this is not a movie you watch if you're not inclined towards seeing anything like sexually, what's the word? Abusive, or whatever. Like, don't watch this for sure.
Yeah, go watch his
But
Holocaust film. It's much happier.
yeah, exactly. The Europa.
Europa, yeah.
That's right. It actually is. Yeah. But like, if you are willing to kind of enter into this discussion with him, I think these movies that we've seen in the Depression trilogy, he's stopped storytelling and he's kind of now like looking inwards and kind of telling like very personal stories, right? And I actually don't think Nymphomaniac would be that hard to watch again, especially Volume One. But even Volume Two, like there are some hard scenes, like the abortion sequence is just gut wrenching. But like I think he balances this discuss like these movies just to me seem like a discussion he's having, and he's kind of inviting us into what's going on in his mind, and it's a very complicated, messy place, but in a way that's sort of unique to have somebody who's willing to be that naked in front of the world and say like this is kind of everything going on in my mind. And so I'm careful to say this, but I'm a little bit grateful for him for being willing to do that. I think the only thing I've seen like close to this is Jodorowsky's work as he started to get into like some of the pain in his life and put that into his movies. Is the only other artist I've seen who I feel like is this raw and kind of like open about themselves on camera.
I think that's a good place to end it. And I think we can move on to our final film if you guys are ready.
Yes, sir.
All right. Well, so we've been through, me and Chris especially have been through quite a journey, and it almost feels surreal, but we are on to our final film that he made in 2018. He has done the final season of The Kingdom since then, but this is his final feature film, The House That Jack Built. Failed architect, engineer, and vicious murderer Jack narrates the details of some of his most elaborate orchestrated crimes, each of them a towering piece of art that defines his life work as a serial killer for 12 years. Before we get started, I don't know if you remember this from episode 1 that we talked about this a little bit, Chris, that the nursery rhyme, the house that Jack built, is sung in his first movie, Elements of a Crime.
Yes, good job. I had
Yeah.
good job. I
Yeah,
forgot to
so
bring
we've
that back.
officially come full circle here.
That's right.
So I guess for the final time, where does the house that Jack built rank on They Shoot Pictures? And I'm assuming this one's on They Shoot Zombies.
Uns Unsurprisingly, this is on They Shoot Zombies. In fact, is this his highest ranked horror film? Let's see.
I wouldn't doubt it. This feels like the most
Antichrist
obvious
is
horror
his
film.
highest ranked horror film at 205.
Yeah.
And then it gets into this is his second one that's fully his. So House That Jack Built is at 1,371. Kind of close to it is, let's see, what are some, so The Living and the Dead, Pet Cemetery 2, Urban
Okay, it's
Legends
better
Final
than Pet
Cut,
Cemetery 2.
Urban Legend Final Cut.
Jesus Christ. Couldn't even be the good final Urban Legend.
Exactly. So I don't know. I think that this is probably hurt by people being tired of him a little bit, would be my guess. Because I think this is actually a pretty good movie. But 1371, and then on They Shoot Pictures, it is not beloved. It's just barely in the top 10,000.
Really?
9,297.
I knew this was divisive. This one was particularly divisive. I think this was the first one he got to come back to Cannes for,
That's right.
because he'd been kicked out since 2011.
That's right.
And this included a bunch of people leaving, and of course a 7-minute standing ovation, because you're going to get standing ovations at Cannes mean nothing unless they are like 30 seconds long or they're 2 hours long. That is the only way it makes sense.
That's right.
Yeah, so he got that. So first time back. We'll see if he comes back for anything else. But Ryan, I know you were a big fan. This was actually why this is the one you wanted to talk about. So let's hear your thoughts on what made you want to talk about this one.
Well, the first thing, which is a really silly thing to grab onto for this film, I think in general, I am fascinated with proper depictions of neurodivergencies in film. And the way that they show some of the symptoms of OCD in this movie are palpable. Specifically, the killing of the old woman alone in her house, and the way that he has to go back inside multiple times. And the biggest thing is he is picturing things that we as the audience know are not wrong inside the house, but he is picturing in his mind very clear evidence that he's going to get caught. And the way that it hounds at him until he goes in there to check on it is one of the best depictions of OCD I have ever seen put on film ever. I love that they were able to give, even though it's not a great character, but give some sort of humanity in that aspect. And yeah, that's the first thing. I'll open up discussion with that.
And because we're gonna come back to that because I have a lot of thoughts about that too. So, Chris, what were your thoughts? This one, I think this is me and Ryan's favorite of the three, and I think you've already kind of let loose. This was not your favorite of the three. So, what are your thoughts?
No, it's not, but it still ranks high for me in terms of his movies. Um, yeah, I'm trying to think of how to do like the quick version of it. So basically, the reason this movie falls for me a little bit mm, is because I think like the movie's so polished. It's a weird complaint. But we've talked about on the I think it was the last episode, we talked about how Von Trier is a master at sort of understanding like the film stock to use for the stories he's trying to tell, right? Like even like Dancer in the Dark is on this kind of like handheld camera at times. Like he just has such a deep understanding of like I think visually what's going to bring out the most powerful story on top of the story he's telling. And for me, this is like I would, at least my reading of this story, and I understand it gets grandiose. I would have loved it if the film stock started off pretty rough, and then there was like flashes of like some of these shots are paintings and like beautiful, beautiful shots, especially as he's descending into hell, right? As part of this. But like, I think this would have been a good film to kind of have a little bit more of that like handheld style and kind of that like immediacy as opposed to the polished production. So there's that. I know that might sound like a nitpick, but I feel like this is a weird one to kind of have that like cleanliness on. Although I guess now that I say that out loud, you can make an argument that's the OCD coming through. You would want it to be as perfect as possible. So
That's
maybe I'm gonna
exactly what I
talk.
was going to say.
Yeah, maybe I'm talking myself out of that one. Um, and the other slight nitpick it was just going to be I don't really understand both in Nymphomaniac, but I think it's worse here. Like the way that he sets up the five stories, I never could fully wrap my hand around like why he's choosing these five as opposed to like the over 60 people he's killed or whatever. Like what like why these five were singled out. I don't know if I quite got it, so maybe that was an intelligence thing on my part. But outside of those nitpicky things, this is a very well made movie. Like I'm not gonna nitpick it to death because this is a well made film. I think the more I'm thinking about it now, because I just saw it a few hours ago, the more I'm sitting on it, I might even say it's better made than Nymphomaniac. So I don't know. My initial reaction was to like Nymphomaniac better, but y'all might talk me out of it. I'm kind of even doubting myself as I start. What about you, Zach?
So, I guess I'll give a little bit of a history about this. So, this movie has probably one of my favorite trailers for any movie. My girlfriend has never seen this movie, by the way, but she has actually seen this trailer quite a few times because I'll just randomly turn it on. And she has always loved the part in the trailer, and it's in the movie too, where the body is like behind the car, and it's just that part where it begins to rain. She thinks that part's hilarious, as I do too. And I think a lot of that captures Von Trier, especially as we have like went through beginning to end to his filmography. I feel like The House That Jack Built captures what he is as a filmmaker probably better than anything else, maybe besides like Five Obstructions, but that's just more of him telling us like how he views art, and this is kind of how he views
Right,
himself.
right.
And I think I think a lot of that is captured here. While it is more polished than a lot of his earlier films, I do appreciate that. I think he does kind of find that balance between things like Melancholia and Antichrist and things like that that are a little bit more. I don't want to call them traditional, but they're not as they have more traditional blocking and lighting and things like that, because I think the story needed that sort of thing. Where this is kind of a mix of, yeah, none of that stuff matters. I'm here to get emotion, and the middle ground between that and things like Melancholia. So yeah, I won't go too deep beyond that. I really love this movie. I have a memory of this film when it came out in 2018, where I was so excited to see it. For a long time, they didn't know about the unrated cut, if it would get released in the US. Obviously, that's what played at con. Um, and what ended up happening was, when it got released digitally, Google Play Store accidentally released the unrated cut for about like 5 hours. And if you bought it, you got to keep it. They didn't even take it from us or anything. I bought that thing as soon as somebody had noted that they had accidentally released the unrated cut by
Oh,
mistake.
wow. Okay.
So I got to see the unrated cut very early, before it ever came out through the IFC Blu-ray. Really cool. It's like one of my favorite memories of finding things that you feel like you shouldn't have. And I think that's perfect for a movie like this, to have something that you feel like you're not supposed to have.
Totally.
You know, I gotta be honest, I've only seen the unrated cut. Do you know offhand what the differences are?
It's not much. I'll tell you the biggest one, and this is how, because I was checking to see, because it doesn't say on the disc if it's unrated or not. But the way I know to tell is the part where he cuts off his girlfriend's breast. They actually show it in the unrated. They cut that out to make it more implied in the R-rated cut. And I think they are not as explicit on the children killing. Like I think they at least shorten a lot of that.
God, man, that knee shot.
I mean,
God bless.
yeah, I mean, that whole scene, and I want to see what you guys think, because the way I kind of view this film is, it's so interesting for him to go for a serial killer, especially one that you could easily read as kind of pretentious. I feel like this is kind of a tongue-in-cheek of Lars, where he is like, it's almost him as people view him, like an overly artistic sadist
So,
almost.
so
Yeah.
can I confirm that real quick?
Yes, please do.
As much as I am down on Curzon right now, they put in one special feature which is awesome. It's just this one Danish interviewer. Obviously, him and Lars von Trier go like a long way back. They're like joking with each other, and von Trier accuses him of being like overly harsh with him in the past and stuff. I don't know, like it's clear they have a good rapport, and so he asks him 9 questions. In one of the questions, he says, "Is it safe to assume that the house that Jack built is basically the you just coming out against and speaking to the crimes that the public feels you've committed?" And he says, "That's not where it started, but that's where it ended. Yes, that's right."
And I think if this ends up being his final film, and I always hope it's not, because it's very sad to hear a story of basically somebody who is doing something they passionately love isn't going to be able to do it anymore. If this is where it ends, I do think it's a good ending for like his career, because of that. Like, it just feels, particularly, all of his stuff feels personal, but this one feels like more of an examination of himself.
Great.
Yeah, it's hard to have a better ending than. Is there spoilers? Are there spoilers to this?
I mean, they
Not
tell
really.
you at the beginning. So so obviously the story, the main, I kind of look at this film as an anthology. I think that's
Yeah.
pretty fair to say. And the big wraparound story is Dante's Inferno. I'm going to talk a lot more about Dante's
Yeah.
Inferno here later. But that kind of gives away what's going on. He's in hell. And so we kind of know where it ends, to a degree. So yeah, I feel like there isn't really spoilers here. We can't, unless, except for like maybe the last 20 seconds. So I think as long as we keep it away from there, we're okay.
Okay. Then I'll hold off on what I was gonna say.
Oh, you're like right in the last 20 seconds. Okay, we'll get back there. We'll go through all that towards
Yeah.
the end. But I do want to kind of, since we're already there a little bit, I did think it was interesting, and I don't know if this is on purpose. I know he's struggled with Parkinson's for a while now, but he really didn't get to finish his last story. Like, he the whole thing about the 5 men in a row, just about the Full Metal Jacket bullet. He didn't
Hmm.
get to finish it. And I almost wonder if there's like a bit of intentionalism with that, to the fact that, an artist's work is almost never done, that
What do
sort
you
of
mean he
thing.
didn't get to finish it? Because we see the bullet fire, or
Do
we
we?
hear the bullet fire, right?
Oh, we hear it. Yeah. Yeah. I don't
Yes.
know. We don't get to see the aftermath of it, though. We don't get to see like necessarily how it finishes. And I mean, I guess more into what I think you're going to say towards the end as well.
Well, but to your point, we don't know if he gets captured by the police or not, right?
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, that's true. So that doesn't, for somebody who's so prone to take things through to the logical conclusion, that's a drinking game now for this. Um, we don't see the ending there, so maybe that's kind of what you're talking about.
Yeah.
And
Probably a
that,
little bit more. I couldn't remember if it actually did fire or not. For some reason in my memory, they didn't fire, but I guess it did. But we don't see the aftermath, which is like the only thing we don't see the aftermath of, right?
right.
Yeah. Yeah.
Now I'm doubting it. It did fire.
Well,
It,
it
Ryan, we
did
need you
fire.
here.
And to be fair, in that last film that we talked about, we don't see that logical conclusion carried out on screen either. We
Yeah.
do hear it.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. And I mean, I think there's a lot of overlap with this film and Nymphomaniac, because obviously it's somebody telling a story to an outside observer who is, maybe the more logical. Obviously, Verge is supposed to be referenced to Virgil the poet from Dante's Inferno, that sort
mm-hmm,
of thing.
mm-hmm,
And it's telling those stories with that commentary with it.
right.
It just feels like he evolved it to Jack to not just be like two random people who found it, but his actual journey into the Inferno, so to speak.
Yeah.
And I know we were talking about a little bit ago, that you were unsure of what exactly what the purpose was of the stories he told. And there is a couple callbacks to why he discusses one of them. I think the only one he like directly comments on is the family one. Like when they talk about having a family, he then goes through the fourth or fifth story. I can't remember the order now. I think it might be the fourth.
But if you're telling the story of a serial killer, I think the relationship he has with his family would be in like any of those stories, right? So I certainly got that one. And
Yeah, and I think the rest of them are him becoming more sadistic in a way. Like he is literally going down the levels of hell sort of thing. Because in the first one, we can kind of go through these one time. The one with Uma Thurman, he has a lot of restraint on murdering her. Like, obviously he shouldn't anyway, but I mean, it seems like he's doing about every single thing he can not to murder her.
well,
And
this is where
then,
the dark humor comes through, right?
Oh yeah.
Because like she she's like you're almost kind of championing and hitting her with that thing, right? Like she's
yeah,
the
because I
worst.
mean, she's almost to the point of, I mean, she is obnoxious. Like, it's like, dude, stop.
She's
Like,
the
let the poor
worst.
guy
Like, why
go.
would you say you're too much of a wimp to do anything about it to a stranger in a van?
Yeah, especially somebody who's helping you, like, at the end of the day. So but I think that contracts well to, by the time we get to, the way he treats his girlfriend, and the way he treats those kids, and, his final ones. It's almost like they're getting progressively worse as he gets older. And it's
That's
almost
true.
like he's damning himself more and more, through each one. And it kind of reminds me too, and he really, the one with the girlfriend, I think, has the most references to Ted Bundy. I'm going to be the weird psycho true crime nerd here.
Go for it.
He directly talks about that you can pretend to be crippled, and that makes things easier. That's exactly what Ted Bundy did to lure women into his car. Was he'd pretend to be injured. So that's a big part of that. And it also kind of reminds me of a quote Bundy had, where he's like, murder is like changing a tire, which I think is funny, because that's the first story. Is the first time you do it, you put all your tools out, you're very organized, you do it the way you're supposed to do it. And he's like, by the 30th time, you're wondering where the wrench is.
Interesting.
And in case it isn't obvious, fuck Ted Bundy, so no one thinks I'm taking up for the guy, but still, I think there is a lot of connections to Bundy here, and it makes sense. This
Quite a
is
few.
You what, Ryan?
All I said was there's quite a few. Yeah.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. There is. Yeah. So and it makes sense. I mean, if you're going to talk about an American serial killer, maybe Dahmer is the only one more synonymous with the American serial killer. But Bundy is definitely one of them. When you think of the American serial killer, it's one of them's definitely Ted Bundy. And you're casting Matt Dillon. You're casting someone who's conventionally attractive, who has at least some type of charm to him, things like that. He's not eating people and kind of a weirdo, so you don't want to go the Dahmer route.
I agree. Yeah, I do think a lot of these are the references to Bundy. I think that the OCD aspect is certainly tied in and believed with a few of the serial killers that are pretty notorious. Yeah, I think the way that they frame him to be helpful is certainly a reference to some of these major serial killers as well.
Yeah, and I mean, it kind of also suggests that all serial killers have the same sort of pathetic story.
Mm,
Like, I think that's one thing he does very well is I don't think he ever glorifies like what Jack is doing. Like,
mm-mm.
obviously, even though it represents himself, there is a little bit of self-hate there. I mean, obviously the audience, I think, finds Jack a bit pretentious or aloof and things like that. And you kind of see that he gets away with things more because people are incompetent or people don't check things out more than he's this evil mastermind who figured it out. Like, he gets caught in the second one if it doesn't rain or if the
Right,
police do their job,
right.
and I think that's a lot of them.
And with his girlfriend, even he like runs out and says he's killed 30 people, and they're like, "All right, take him in." Like they're
Yeah,
not.
and I mean, and then that part, like, I think this is like the most eerie part of the film. Like, there's a lot of gross stuff that happens, but that part where she's screaming for help and he starts screaming for help
Yeah,
to like mock her.
yeah, yeah,
And I love that zoom out too, like where he goes to the window, like nobody wants to help, and it like zooms out.
yeah,
Like, we don't talk a lot about like how Von Trier uses like camera movements, but he uses them a lot here. Like the way he
yeah.
zooms in, the way he cuts. It's very thoughtful. It's a lot more thoughtful than a lot of his films are because I think he wants things to be more natural. But here, these zoom ins and these zoom outs are so effective all the way through.
Ryan, I know you watch a lot of horror. I know you watch a lot of other things too, but you watch a lot of horror. Um, how do you rank if there's a spectrum of like, horror can be fun, horror can be haunting, like, horror can stay with you and actually scare you. Like what kind of a horror movie is this to you? Horror film or whatever.
I mean, that is the question, actually. Reflecting on this movie, that I think most people that watch this will say, "What, what is this movie?"
Yeah,
Because you could easily argue that this is a black comedy through and through. And
right.
in fact, I was, once we were going to start talking about the Dante stuff, this movie made me really wish that Lars had been able to, or will be able to, make a divine comedy. I can't imagine how amazing that could have been.
Oh man,
Uh,
I didn't think about that, but yes, absolutely. It's like, please get you and
right?
more and Matt Dillon together. I would watch so much of that.
um, the fact that we are finding silliness throughout, and not just in like a couple small scenes, but throughout this dark of a movie, it shows just how much is uh throughout all of his thoughts, all of his films, all of humanity itself. And something about every single chapter in this film just really made me laugh out loud. And again, I really think this is a black comedy because as I mentioned for Nymphomaniac, my wife watched this with me. We actually watched this with my mom, and all three of us loved it. And yeah, this movie hit hard for all three of us. I think it was done extremely well. I think that the most effective scenes are Matt Dillon just taking what is written in a script and delivering it in a way that I don't think many actors could. I'm not saying that, this is a role that nobody else could have played, because I'm sure that some others could have, but he definitely found something in this script. And obviously, through the journey that you guys have been on, you've talked about many films that people have received scripts from him, and I guarantee you, people went, "What the fuck am I getting myself into?" But
Mhm.
when you're seeing how Matt Dillon can go from bashing in Uma Thurman's head to, uh, you know, one of the most disturbing scenes in here, which I kind of want to go in depth for just a second, but the scene after he kills the children that we just brought up, and he takes the time to make one of those children smile.
Yeah.
Grumpy, yes, grumpy.
It is one of the most depraved things that somebody in that situation could do.
Right.
And the way that the camera lingers in this scene,
Yeah.
and the entire scene of the date with the mom and the two kids, Lars lingers on many scenes in this film, but that scene specifically, oh man, does he let those shots have a couple extra seconds of breathing room.
Yeah. Yeah.
That shot is special. And as somebody that appreciates the finer art of directors making choices that people do not expect, and especially one that appreciates the art of a dear friend of all of ours, Erica Schultz, over at the Unsung Horrors podcast, of directors just flat out doing the ultimate sweetest taboo and killing kids. They really go for it with this movie and
Yeah, that's right.
show you how dark this scene can be. And he just simply does not care.
Yeah.
Yeah, even like a lot of movies that will kill kids, they don't necessarily obscure it, but they either do it very quickly. Like I think at Feast. Feast is one that, gets a lot of credit, as it should, for, killing a kid the way it does. But there's not many where I can sit there and say I watch a kid get headshotted, like just point blank, and it just sits there with it. And then like the kid getting shot in the knee and basically getting his leg blown off.
Oh.
Like that is dark in its own sort of way. Like there are movies that will kill kids. There's even less that will sit there and, like what you're talking about, Ryan, and just sit with it.
Yep.
And one thing I love about that scene, since we're on it, is you're talking about linger. One thing he doesn't linger on is what is the catalyst for that decision. So we get to see that they're having a happy time. He's teaching the kid how to shoot. Next thing we know, he is hunting those children and their mother. And I really love the decision because it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter
Right.
what stupid catalyst caused them to do it.
Right.
But it's almost more effective that way because, I mean, there's nothing you can make up that's going to be worse than the fact that he's going to do it anyway. Like, I mean, there's nothing that's going to justify it.
And for that family, it probably felt that jarring.
Yeah, and I mean, you look at, like, we talk about like the first scene with Uma Thurman, the audience is almost with Jack in a sense, like, okay, just we know what you're going to do, just go ahead and do it, just so she's gone. In this one, you're not even given, the attempt to, justify it because there really isn't a justification for it. Even if those kids are annoying, they're kids.
Right. But it goes like it keeps going, right? Like the characters that he murders, he has less and less of a reason, quote unquote reason to do it, right? Like by the time he's tying their heads together in the freezer, like one of the guys was just standing around basically, right? Or something like remember that the last guy that he pulled in, the black guy, there he had no beef with that guy, right? It was just like
You're here.
he was just like,
You're here. That's basically the whole point.
right? Wasn't it? If I remember correctly, like there was like no reason to pull that guy in.
It's kind of like going back to Nymphomaniac of what we talk about, like an intellectual curiosity.
Yeah.
Like he's just curious
Right.
at this point, and it's the most extreme version of that. Like,
Right.
and you talk about the dark comedy part, probably the part that does make me laugh the hardest in the whole movie is when the guy's like, "That's not a Full Metal Jacket,"
Right.
and he
I'm
gets
a
so
military man.
pissed, and he's like, "I am so sorry for this gentleman." And it's just like, oh, it's so good. The whole part is so good.
Yeah,
OCD coming out again there.
right.
Yeah, it's like, dude. I just like that the one guy was just like, I'm sure it's just to buy time, but he's like, dude, that's not a Full Metal Jacket.
Yeah, it's a risky play to enrage the guy just about to shoot you, right?
Yeah, it's
Um,
like, well, I guess he's like, look, if he's shooting from the other end, maybe he's like, he's getting shot first. He has the most reason to say, because the guy who's last, he's probably like, please don't tell him it's not
it's
a
like
Full
shut
Metal
up, shut up,
Jacket.
shut
I
up.
might have a chance.
Jeez. Um, yeah.
And
You know,
does it bother anyone else that they got Bruno Gans instead of Stellan Skarsgård for the Verge part? Because it feels like that part was written for him and he was busy.
you know, it was interesting. So I don't know if this is why, um, but I was thinking like this is because Udo Kier's in all these movies, right? Briefly, or is he not in Jack?
I don't think he's in Jack.
I don't think he
He
is.
was the waiter in Volume
Yeah,
2.
that's right. He was a waiter in Nymphomaniac. Yeah. No, maybe he wasn't in Jack. Okay. So Skarsgård and Kier were both missing from Jack. Okay, that's interesting. But remember Bruno? So there was a comment. Oh, again, this is part of that interview. Sorry, part of the interview with that guy where he says that he really one of his favorite authors is Patricia Highsmith,
Mhm.
for what she did with Ripley, and he wanted to base the character somewhat on how he interpreted Ripley. But remember, Bruno Gans was in American Friend. I don't know if that has any connection, as to why he would have wanted to have him for this. But that was one thing I was thinking about. If he's obsessed with all the Ripley stuff, maybe there's a connection there.
I did want to. You're talking about the favorite author thing. I think this is a good time to go into the Dante's Inferno stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Um,
please.
yeah. So, just I guess so we can get this out. Have either of you guys went through the Divine Comedy or any parts of it?
If not,
I did a long, long time ago. Yeah, this is one of the most I don't know, this is a weird word to use, but like rewarding, especially for cinema, journeys that you can take on a literary journey alongside your cinema watching.
Yeah, and I think one thing that isn't an accident. So when Dante wrote the Inferno, of course, he's a self-insert. The whole thing is he's in a he gets to hang out with his favorite author, Virgil. And he gets to hang, he gets to see all the people that and they get to tell him how
Yep.
great of an author he is and how good at stuff he is. And honestly, Dante is super obnoxious in Inferno. And he's really made fun of. Like that's one of the things that's made fun of Inferno. And I think it's because a lot of people don't go into Paradiso and they don't go into Purgatory, where Dante has a ton of character development as a person. Like he becomes a better person through his journey. He's just a complete asshole in Inferno,
Right.
um, because it's really just like an ego boost for him. And I think that's kind of an interesting play here with the house that Jack built is, he's getting led through a guy named Verge and he's getting a chance to talk about his things and what he's accomplished and things like that. It's really the differences because, at the end of the day, Dante was being given access to hell. He wasn't actually being sentenced there. So we get to see everything through the eyes of someone who, even in their own mind, seems superior and is going to obviously get to leave. Where Jack is getting to see kind of another instance of probably what everyone else gets to experience. He doesn't get to take the steps, he doesn't get to hang out with his favorite author. He gets to see some things with this dude, get acid, and yeah, that's about it. So it's a really cool thing. Like it's almost like it brings down Jack's self-importance. He thinks he's as important as Dante is. And Dante got to write himself into like fame, where Jack does not get to do that.
oh, interesting.
Yeah.
Um,
Do
but
you,
then there's a lot of stuff. Like one thing I noticed in here, and I've read a little bit, is this is kind of Lars's chance to talk about all the things that have influenced him through all these years. Like,
Plus,
I mean, we talk about the OCD one, which he keeps throughout the thing. We're going to get back to that because I remember we were going to talk about that. That's supposed to be a reference to a Ray Bradbury story called, I think it's like At the Bottom of a Fruit Bowl or something like that, where it's about a murderer who is trying to erase every fingerprint he has after a murder. Like, that's the whole story. And just little things like that being used is almost like in this anthology format. It's really cool. But to get back to Ryan's point about the OCD, because I think it's a very interesting point of the portrayal. Really, when we think of like major OCD portrayals in film, it's really Monk, the TV show, and then it's As Good as It Gets with Jack Nicholson. Is there one I'm forgetting? I feel like those are the two main ones, right?
Those are the pop culture known ones.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and they're obviously taking it to a very much an extreme. I guess I'll get a little personal here. I have been diagnosed with OCD, so it's and I like Monk. I like the show. I enjoy watching it. It's a very exaggerated form of it to the point where there's a lot of reality there, but it's also like the butt of the joke as well, which is fine. I don't find necessarily offense to that. But I think the thing that Jack Bill does is it is not his entire personality. It's not his entire life. It's something he deals with, and it goes beyond his obsessions and his compulsions in just everyday life. Like, like that compulsion he has to run that old woman over. It's something that makes him do it. It doesn't excuse anything he does, but I think he explains it well when he talks about like the street lamps, like the
yeah, that was a beautiful description.
Yeah, and I think the OCD, I think that's a good description for that too. Is you handle your compulsions and it goes away for a while, and then it comes back, and it's just that back and forth to eternity sort of thing. So I think it's a very, very interesting portrayal. It's obviously like if you're somebody who's looking for that representation, you probably hoped it wasn't the guy who killed 60 some people, but you take it where you can get it.
I also liked how it is properly portrayed as exacerbated when he is under a lot of stress.
Yes.
In other situations, they would have played it up for laughs, but in all reality, just more stress being applied, more pressure, more feeling confined is going to force him to respond in a way that is scattered and feeling more like he needs to deal with his normal compulsions that he always fights in those situations, even more so. And that's, again, not something that we see portrayed properly in a lot of those movies.
No, and I mean, it's like when you take something like Monk, the entire point is how does he solve these crimes even as a genius when he has to fight through like these almost arbitrary things. That's like the entertainment of the show. So obviously not intended to be necessarily an accurate portrayal. But then you get things like As Good as It Gets, to where it's kind of a weird one where I think they want to be authentic, but then it's really not. It's just it's one of those like writer convenience things, I think, isn't As Good as It Gets, which I have not seen in a long time. So maybe my memory's bad on that. But, when you talk about something like The House that Jack built, it's almost like Von Trier kind of kept up with his stress level, which good for him. Jack is stressed through most of this. But actually, now that I'm thinking about it, the part where he's the most unkempt and he's the least stressed, like that the part with his girlfriend or whoever she is to him, he's very unkempt. He hasn't shaved in a while. He doesn't seem to be necessarily taking as good a care of himself. But he also does not seem stressed about the situation really at all. Like he's going out there basically putting himself because he is so confident he'll be fine.
That's right. And he even throughout the movie, he even makes a couple comments about that, right? Like the more he killed, the more he felt his OCD like slipping or like getting less.
Yeah, because I mean, you think about like the first few. I'm sure I couldn't say I can understand him in his shoes.
Yeah, walk
but
us
I would
through
imagine that it is rather stressful to hide a body and to do that 60 sometimes. So I can imagine the stress is there.
Yeah. I remember in y'all are praising him for the OCD research. I remember if for both Dogville and Manderley, in some of the interviews they were talking about how he would send out scouts to basically become an expert in like a certain topic, and then they would come back and they would have like long discussions about that topic, and
That
then
sounds
he
like such
would,
a fun job.
oh yeah, heck yeah.
That sounds awesome.
So I know totally. So for this, I could see him either, A, having OCD potentially, or hiring somebody who's either an expert or like a researcher on it, and just sitting there picking their brain and like putting that conversation into the story. I could see him as someone as doing that and spending a couple hours with somebody who has those characteristics so that he can bring them in.
Which is kind of surprising because, in Dancer in the Dark, he just took vague eye disease that doesn't exist. Boom.
Oh, interesting. Is that right? Is that right?
Yeah, everything I looked up says that they never say in the movie what it is. There is nothing that like quite fits what he's talking about. Which I mean,
Uh,
it's a plot device. It's whatever. Dancer in the Dark. We'll get to the ranking here, but it's very high for me. So,
yeah, yeah, yeah.
no criticism. I just think it's funny that maybe that's something he decided with afterwards that maybe it's a regret or something that he didn't do his due diligence there when he should have. But
Mm.
there's probably lots of things he regrets with Dancer in the Dark. So
You know,
it's
he praised Bjork a lot in the interview that he did.
oh, she's
Um,
great in it. I think that would be hard for anybody to like deny that she's not really good in that movie.
yeah, it's interesting to and maybe I don't know if they've swept stuff under the bridge. It certainly doesn't seem like it, but he took a chance to praise her at least for her role in that. Um, hmm. So okay, so all of this stuff happens, and then he opens up. He hears his name being called, and he opens up that one door that he was never able to open, and he finds Verge there, right?
Yes.
And then Verge says something which, if you think about it, is fairly like chilling, I think, in a way, where he says, "I've been right by your side the whole time, but you haven't noticed me." Um, I don't know if chilling is the right word, but like I kind of got a little bit of shivers in my spine hearing that this idea that like death or somebody who's going to take you on a journey into hell has been right there the whole time. Like you've been like everybody like all of hell knows about you. Don't worry. you know.
Yeah, and it's almost like every time he went to that room, obviously it was to do something awful. Like
Right.
he just killed somebody, or he was getting ready to kill somebody, or he was doing things to the bodies. And it's there feels like there is this underlying, and I think he's had this, I think we talked about this in other movies, whereas there's this sense of destiny in his
Mm,
films, or
mm, mm,
at
mm.
least karma. Obviously the part I was talking about before where it rains when he needs it to, and he talks about the idea that if he believes in God or not, and then makes a joke like, obviously that's a little ridiculous in the situation I'm in right now.
Uh-huh,
uh
uh-huh.
and but it's that idea that was he always destined to be this way? And we talked about, I think you mentioned he was a Calvinist at one point in his life.
Yeah, yeah. He has a quote unquote a complicated relationship with religion,
Yeah,
but calls himself a born again Christian, which is interesting.
but if you're like exploring your Calvinist side, which even if he is or he isn't, this idea in Calvinism is he never had a choice in any of this.
Uh-huh. That's right.
That he was always going to be this way.
That's right.
This, and if he's always by his side, then he never really had a choice of what he did or what happened to these people. And that is an interesting idea in itself that I don't know how to really explore, because you almost don't want to like get Jack off the hook, because obviously everything he does is awful. But then, if you're looking at the bigger picture of them exploring him going to hell, then there's a lot of questions to ask about like what part he played.
Speaking of like this, just for a quick something I wanted to bring up. Was it in the end of Nymphomaniac or the end in this movie? I'm sorry, they're running together a bit because I saw them so close together. Which is the one that takes a few minutes to explore how the dictators in our history are it's a little bit of a sympathetic view on the dictators in our history.
Well, I assume it's this one. I'm actually have that letterboxed up while we're talking, and I love that two of the cast in here are Adolf Hitler and Benito Mussolini.
Okay. And it's this one, yeah. This is the frustrating thing to me about Von Trier, and I think it's just part of the package of who he is. You just kind of get it all with him, right? What's the point in arguing that Idi Amin has redeeming value? And the dictators are taking, a desire that we all have in us and basically commending them for their ability to like see it through. Like even if it's true at an intellectual level, like why say it? Like just don't make that point.
Well, and that goes, and you know what? I wonder if he did that because of his comments after Melancholia.
I think so.
Like, I feel like it's just him fucking around. Like, he's just, at this point, it's just like, most filmmakers would be like, I'm not touching that with a 10-foot pole because I almost fucked my career doing that. And he's just going to say, no, I'm going to lean into it just because I can.
Going back to it.
Yeah, let's do it again. And I'll do it in a film and you'll have it in print.
Yeah, it's like I used to be really into the punk scene, and I know Ryan, you were as well. In that I always think about there's always a handful of punks that were like you wouldn't bring them home to mom. They were just like rough around the edges, and I get that same vibe from him a lot. Like I love the punk scene because I think punk speaks to like saying what's on your heart and like being authentic and not worrying about what people think and like doing it your way. And I think it's a very progressive feminist, like it's a good movement when it's done right. But man, there's some annoying people in the movement.
I would agree, yeah.
And I kind of feel that way about Von Trier. Like if you hear him talk, he's like this very thoughtful, pro-woman, like intellectual guy, and it's just like he can't help himself sometimes. He's just like some of the stuff he says, you're like, ugh, I like 90% of you, man. Why can't you just keep some of that to yourself?
Well, it kind of goes back to we didn't talk about this a lot with the Nymphomaniac part, but it's kind of, I'm trying to think of an example where we talked about this before where, I remember what it was. We had a discussion on something where somebody's not technically a pedophile. There's another name for it if they're into like teenagers or whatever. And it's like, you don't really bring it up because while you're correct, it just makes you look bad. And it's kind of the same thing with where she's talking about the pedophile thing. She is correct. Most people do not act on it. There's a whole argument about the idea that, the stigma that's around it has caused harm because it doesn't allow people to get help. Right. That's great. But saying it can sometimes make you sound like an asshole. And I think he really likes to do that. Like say these things that no one else will say. And most people are like, I have too much shame to say that, or I'm not even going to humor that idea. And maybe there's some good to that, but it also is like, it's hard. There's times I feel really bad for Von Trier. We talked about plenty during this, and there's times where I'm like, but he sort of did it to himself sometimes.
Exactly. Yeah. There's a comedian that always shows up on my Instagram, and I don't think he's that funny, but he made a good joke. He told a joke about somebody who was called a pedophile, and he's like, let me break it down for you. There's like 3 different types, and he breaks down the types. He goes, the problem with me knowing this is that the only people that are able to break it down to this level are pedophiles. And that's how I kind of feel sometimes, especially when he starts defending using like the N-word. You're just like, dude, just stop. Just stop.
And like, there's an idea that I can't remember who said it, but it's the idea that new ideas cannot be made without being provocative. Sure. And I think he has lived that motto his entire life. Like he's like, the more provocative I am, the more ideas come out. And it's like, dude, I guess you can be that martyr. All power to you.
That's
I
his
will
Scarlet.
not join you in that one.
That's his Scarlet Letter, I guess, right?
Yeah, no kidding. And like I said, there's been plenty of unfair things. We talked about during Antichrist the way people talk to him because he made a movie. And you've seen that one, correct, Ryan? You've seen Antichrist?
I have not actually.
Oh, okay. I was going to ask your opinions on like the disturbing nature because me and Chris talked about it. I guess we're doing a kind of an overview of Von Trier to end this right up, but it's this idea that his movie isn't like it's disturbing, but it's so weird how attacked he was. Like he had made something so disturbing that film had never seen before.
Yeah,
When it really just seemed to come down to a talented director made a disturbing film, and we're going to criticize that.
that's right.
I feel like that happens with pretty much any of these directors that have showed talent on. Uh, I don't know. I hate to make like an objective statement broad like that, but like many directors make tame films, and eventually they get the idea to make something that they wanted to make for a long time, and it comes out and it's subversive to what they've done before, and suddenly people turn on them, or it gains a reputation where it's more harsh than it actually was, simply because people were not used to that from that individual, which isn't really fair in the grand scheme of things, obviously.
Yeah, it's like actually there was I wish I wrote down which movies it was. This movie was compared to movies that you're gonna have to correct me if I'm right or wrong, Chris. Pasolini?
Oh, Pasolini. Yeah,
Pasolini.
he
There's
loves
like a lot of
Pasolini.
comparisons to some movies he made for this and this movie in particular, but he goes back to Sallow. Like, unfortunately, as other movies that guy made, that is forever going to define his career.
Right.
Yeah, like the Decameron, the Canterbury Tales, a lot of those that were like it wasn't quite so dark, and then something happened to Pasolini, and he got a little bit disenfranchised with the world and made
Yeah,
Salo, but
obviously, he
yeah,
definitely did. But I mean,
yeah,
it's still not fair to him because I've watched, surprisingly, as much as I don't watch a lot of super art house directors, I have seen some of his movies. And I mean, it's like, it's so out of left field, but it's like, it's kind of sad that it's going to define it. Where I think Lars has went the other way. He has been so provocative in his, I think it's just part of him. Like, I don't
yeah.
know what defines him. I don't know if this movie defines him. I don't know if it's going to be Antichrist or whatever it's going to be.
He seems to me like, and we'll get into this when we do the rankings in a second, but he seems to me like one of those that his favorite film is going to be one of three that most people have seen from him. Like I don't, other than the fact that we did this very intentionally, I don't think I've ever met somebody that's seen all of his movies. Um,
No, I have not. I've never. I don't know if I wear it as a badge of honor or not, but I have
no,
not.
so I was about to say that too. They're hard to watch, man. Like they're all 2.5 to 3 hours long. You get dragged through emotional hell every single time, other than his comedies.
And there's a dread that goes into it. Like, I'll be honest, I think part of the reason I always waited so late is because I kind of dreaded it,
Yeah,
and I ended up liking them. Like a lot of them, I liked them,
sure.
and but still, I sat there like, man, I don't want to do this. Like when we went through Dogville, and it's like, do I really want to watch a 3 hour movie where there is no actual sets in this thing? He has drawn chalk on a stage,
Yeah,
and that movie's awesome.
it's
Like,
so good.
yeah, it's like he's good at this, but I still dreaded it. No matter how many times he proved me wrong, I
Yeah,
still dreaded it every
yeah,
week.
yeah,
Like,
yeah, yeah,
what am I gonna have to get through this time?
yeah, yeah. I agree. Before we get into rankings and all that, Ryan, any final thoughts on House that Jack built? Is this? Would you say this is your favorite one that you've seen from him?
Not only would I say that, I have used the word masterpiece about this film
Yeah,
already, and I stand by that. I absolutely think it is. The actress that plays the mother of the two kids, Sophie, I'm not going to be able to give the proper Danish pronunciation of her last
Revolt?
name. Something like that. I really wanted to give her a moment in this because she may have been the best acting in this entire film.
mm,
I was absolutely taken by her performance.
hmm,
Some of the sounds that she made were so palpable.
hmm,
I obviously can't imagine what she was going through, but the way that she portrayed it was probably the closest thing to what somebody in that situation would actually portray.
yeah,
Uh, I I love that um, the end of this movie is the way that it is obviously, when we're discussing the Dante and the circles of hell, the fact that they say out loud, "This is the lowest circle, but you're supposed to be two circles up," and don't explain that for anybody that's not familiar with Dante, I think speaks a lot to who they want to be watching this movie.
Hmm.
Hmm.
Which I really appreciated in a way that sounds pretentious when I say it, but I just mean the the Lars is not one that typically spoon feeds you,
No.
and I certainly appreciate that quite a bit. With this ending of the movie, before we get into the epilogue of the descent, I truly, truly love that we don't see the sniper shot happen. I honestly think that would have undermined the entire film.
And
Yeah,
could we I wish I'd paid more attention because now that you're bringing it up, can we interpret it as that last shot isn't towards them but towards himself since we don't see anything and we know, well, at least we can infer that he kills himself.
I mean, it's for me, it's either that or it's more of a like a microscope on the audience. How many people are going to be disappointed that they didn't see that shot, and that's
Yeah,
going to piss them off?
Yeah.
because you're curious too. Like,
Unfortunately, we all
yeah,
are.
you kind of want to see it. Like, and I guess that is a sense of like self-examination. How like people criticize Von Trier for what he's curious about, but you're curious too.
This is the this is the thing that I loved so much the first time I saw Funny Games is when they y'all have both seen it, right?
Oh yeah.
Yes.
When they turn to the audience and make you take part in this murder now, it's like no 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 no. Like, I don't want to be, don't bring me into this. But at the same time, it's like my eyes haven't left the screen for the first hour and a half or
You
whatever
can turn
until
the movie off, but you don't.
you don't. That's it. Ugh.
Like like
And
the
you have
way
to,
to
then you have to,
win in funny games is to turn it off.
that's right. But you don't. And then then you have to wrestle with the fact that you're like it's like, oh damn, I guess he called me out. That son
Yeah,
of a bitch.
and I think Von Trier's doing the same thing here. I think
Yeah.
one of the things when you talk about self-examination is the part where Verge is telling him, you hate women, which has probably been like one of his most common criticisms his whole career
That's right.
is how he treats women. And I think, and he doesn't really give like a direct answer or defense to that, not a good one. And I think, part of that is like a self-wrestling thing. Like
Yeah.
I don't think he has any conscious effort of how he feels about women, but I think he does examine himself to a degree about how he feels about women, especially as he went through depression and everything else.
Knowing the things that he struggles with, I absolutely think that he thinks about these things when he's accused of them. And if you pay attention to his answers when he's again, like we were talking about last time, you have to watch the whole clip, right? You don't they just pull out the sound bites. But if you watch the whole clip, even when he had that one journalist in his face demanding that he explain, I think it was Antichrist, he like gave it a thoughtful answer. People didn't like the answer, but he didn't blow off the question. He didn't just give us like, he thought about it. And like I do think he thinks a lot about these accusations because I don't think he sees himself that way. I think my hunch is that he feels misunderstood often.
And it
Um,
goes back to the whole five obstructions thing, which I was sitting here thinking if there's any connection between the fact that the five obstructions and there's five things in this. I don't think there is, but I do think it's interesting. They're both kind of a
True.
self-examination of your
They're
own
both
work.
Fibonacci numbers or whatever, right?
Yeah, sure. Yeah. All that leads back to the golden ratio. Um, but yeah, it's interesting to me, where he talks about it's not about making anything good. And I think all art to him is self-examination. 100%. Like it didn't matter if this turned out good or bad. He was going to do it as a form of therapy.
Yeah, I fully agree. I think that's how he sees it. Yeah.
I
In
also got to
fact,
say, I can't disagree anymore with the Rolling Stones review for this. Did any of you read this?
no.
I probably did
So
when it came out, but you'll have to remind me.
at the end, they say the fact that he ends the movie in hell seems superfluous. We've already been there for 2.5 hours.
That's a funny review. I disagree with it,
Is
but
that
it's a
that
funny review.
bastard Peter Travers?
I think so.
Oh man,
The Michael
Travers is
Bay
a
of
good writer.
reviewers.
He pisses me off, but he's actually a pretty talented guy.
I don't know. I grew to hate him because he always gets those quotes on the DVD
Yeah,
covers.
yeah. It's like seeing
But
a Stephen King quote on anything that's even horror adjacent at this point.
that's true.
I made a joke. This is a tangent. I'll keep it quick. It's one of my favorite things. I was telling this about my girlfriend's like, you can pretty much pick out a book on on a bookshelf and find a Stephen King quote on it. She pulled out one that she had on her shelf and it had a Stephen King quote on it. It's like, dude reads all the time. It's insane.
That's right. Yeah, and he'll say something little like, "Oh, new levels of hell" or something like that, and then it's like Stephen King. So here's a question I have for y'all, and I don't know if we are gonna necessarily answer this now, but it's something that I'm thinking about, and I'm gonna like continue kind of mulling over for the next few weeks. I I think in like the balance, Von Trier is because he's trying to become one of these historic like storytellers that's taught in the same way that like Dante is taught, or like the Marquis de Sade is taught. Like he wants to be known as a provocative storyteller for sure. But I think he finds that there's honesty in these. Like he thinks that humans are most honest when they're in this type of like discussion, and he wants to be seen as like a great storyteller in this tradition. And it's the reason why he sets up his stories and the back half of his career in like chapters. And I think it's the reason why he has narrators so often. And I think it's the reason why he makes them all like fairy tales. These kind of like slightly detached from reality sort of stories.
Yeah.
It's an idea I'm just kind of like wrestling with a little bit. But like, how does that sit with y'all? What do you think?
I
I
don't know
mean,
if he's trying to do that, but it certainly can come off that way.
it does make me wonder because especially when you're talking about like wants to be Dante, and we talked about that a little bit with the Dante Inferno, like how he isn't Dante,
Mm.
and and I wonder if that's a rejection of that idea that you make things to be famous, or if it's a self doubt thing where he's kind of coming to terms with the idea. You know, obviously we've talked about his ego through a lot of things, like flipping off Khan when Europa didn't win,
Right.
and things like that. And I mean, he's obviously made comments, some out of context, some not. Um, it's an interesting thing because, like I said, we've talked about it before. It's so hard to read his actual intention in life because he seems to play a character so much. And I kind of went through this where what he says in interviews I take a lot less seriously than what he gives me on the screen. Because I feel like that's more of what he means, but this is
Yeah.
kind of one where it's a hard read. It's an ambiguous read of what it means. Spoiler, real quick, when he falls because he's trying to get out of the hole he's put himself in, essentially.
Yeah. Why why was he trying to cross into heaven?
I think it's hard because if we're just looking at it, Jack just as a character and not as like a stand-in for Von Trier, I think Jack is in the idea that creating art is a wholesome thing. It
Okay.
doesn't really matter how you got there. I think there's a part of him that doesn't necessarily like he understands socially what he does is not acceptable, but I don't actually think he thinks it's bad, like in his own mind.
Okay.
So he doesn't really believe he necessarily deserves to be there.
Yeah, I don't know. I could go with that. I don't know. I couldn't figure that. That's the only piece I couldn't quite figure out. I like in when Verge told him the bridge was broken. I didn't want him to like I wanted him to just accept his fate in a way. I guess I didn't.
Yeah, I feel like
I
he
felt,
always felt like he could get out of it because he had gotten out of so much
hmm,
through
okay.
dumb luck or just willing his way through. It's almost like every serial killer. They just never accept that they'll be caught.
Hmm,
They
okay.
never feel like that's a reality,
Hmm,
and it's why they become more careless.
hmm. It's like
Which
a
you can actually bring back to the OCD aspect too, because he analyzes everything to death.
Yeah, and I mean, it doesn't like. Admittedly, to him, it doesn't look like that far of a gap, and it's not until he's really in it you realize, like, oh, this is a terrible idea.
mhm, yeah.
Well,
Any final thoughts on the film before we get more into his career? And I think we are pulling a Von Trier in terms of runtime on
yeah.
this
So I think
episode.
I'm exhausted out. All I can do with Jack. Anything from you, Ryan?
I think I'm good.
Okay. Well, if you'll indulge me and Chris, I guess we'll give our final ranking here. How's that sound to you? If you're
Oh,
ready, Chris.
I'm ready, man. I have it up. Um, I'm ready. How do you want to do it? You want to just go 15 to 1?
Yeah, like go backwards. Yeah, we can do that.
Okay.
You want me to go first? You want to go first?
What's your 15?
My 15 is The Idiots.
Yeah, same.
Okay, so man, look at that. We
Fuck
agree
that
on one
movie.
at least.
Oh man, who was it? Oh yeah, yeah. Celeste found beauty in it, which I respect. Okay, 14.
Nymphomaniacs Volume 2.
Oh damn. Okay, Mandalay from me.
Okay, and then I have Epidemic for 14.
Wait, 14. Wait, 15. Idiots, and
Yeah,
then
sorry. Yeah, mine's messed up to where I have the kingdom in here. I'm sorry. So it's 15, 14, 13. Number 13, I have Epidemic.
oh, we have already Kingdom. Okay. Yeah, I haven't seen the Kingdom yet. Yeah, I have Epidemic next.
And then I have Manderley.
Okay, it's just slightly switched. From so just and then from here on out, maybe you can just give yours and I'll give mine. But I have to say, like from here on out, I liked everything I saw.
Yeah, I at least have positive things about pretty much everything else.
Yeah, yeah, which is pretty wild. I mean, it's like we're at number 12, I guess. So 12 through 1, I can say that I liked. You wanna?
So what
I
was
feel
your what
like
was your number 12?
yeah, I'll just go Element of Crime.
Yeah, because mine was Manderley. So all right, my number 11 was The Element of Crime.
Nice. And then I put Five Obstructions after that, and I hate doing that, but like I just when you look at
It
like
it's not super rewatchable. Like I don't know if I'll ever rewatch Five Obstructions.
yeah, that's kind of how I feel. So I have it at 11.
And then I have Nymphomaniac Volume 1.
Okay. Top 10 to 1, do you want to just go for it?
Yeah, sure. So you just go for like all of mine.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. What do you think?
All right, yeah, sure. So after that, I have the Five Obstructions,
Yep.
then the Boss of It All,
Mm-hmm.
Dogville,
Mm-hmm.
Antichrist,
Mm-hmm.
Melancholia, Breaking the Waves. Number 3 is Europa. Number 2 is The House that Jack Built, and number 1 is Dancer in the Dark.
Yeah. So I have volume 2 at 10,
Okay.
volume 1 at 9, then Boss of It All. This is hard. This might move for me the more I think about it, but while we were talking, I moved Jack up to 7. It might keep moving for me. I'm liking it more the more we talk about it. Europa at 6, Breaking the Waves 5, Antichrist 4, 3 Dogville, and then you're gonna be surprised at this, Zach, but Dancer Dark is 2 and Melancholy is 1.
It is so wild to me Melancholia is 1.
Yeah.
Just because you shit on that movie for weeks before we rewatched it.
It's beautiful, man. I just missed it. I just missed it. I think that's his most complete film in a lot of different ways. It's a masterpiece. Like I think that's Ryan. You said Jack is a masterpiece, and I can't disagree. I'm not saying one way or the other, but I feel that way when I watch Melancholia. Dancer in the Dark is always going to be a sentimental favorite of mine because I saw it like peak college. I loved Bjork. I loved Radiohead. I like musicals. I like everything about that movie. But I think Melancholia took it from me this time.
Our rankings weren't too different. Like we were mostly in the same range all the
Yeah,
way through.
yeah,
So
So
yeah,
in
yeah,
2 weeks, do we get an episode on the Kingdom?
yeah.
yeah. So I gotta watch what is it? 9 more episodes. I gotta watch 9 more episodes.
I don't know if I can do it in 2 weeks.
Yeah, I mean, so for people listening, if we end up going to another one, it's because we needed a Von Trier break. So we cannot guarantee what the next one is, but we'll see.
But it'll be Michelle Haneke or David Lynch.
Yeah, it's gonna be something.
No, I'm just kidding. I think we'll take a little popcorn break here. Do like a summer blockbuster special. I think we're still deciding on it, right?
Yeah, I think we have some ideas though, but
Yeah.
yeah. So I want to very much thank everyone who sat here and listened to us make ourselves miserable for like what is it, 2 months now?
Yeah. Yeah.
It is greatly appreciated.
Huge shout out to Celeste La Cabra for coming on and helping us get through 3 of them. Semi shout out to Crit for wanting to do it, and hopefully he gets to come on at some point when the schedules align better. And huge shout out to Ryan Verrill from Disconnected who sat through I think emotionally maybe the hardest 3.
Honestly, yeah, I think everyone who volunteered, I see you as Emma Watson from Breaking the Waves. If you've seen that, you know how miserable you made yourselves, and we greatly appreciate it. I have become more whole through your sacrifice.
I feel extra bad that I subjected my mom and wife to some of this.
You didn't watch it? Did you watch Nymphomaniac with your mom?
God, no.
Okay. I was like, we might have to have like a psychological discussion if you did. But I wanted
I mean, to be fair, volume 1 would be palatable, I think. It might be a little weird, but like I think it would be palatable. But like
it's like,
some of the
Mom, come watch this girl get double teamed.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I was gonna say.
Please come watch that with me.
The things that happen in volume 2 should always be within the privacy of your own home. Yeah, it's a wild movie, man. But look, he is a guy that would if he heard us talking like this, he would challenge us, right? And say like, why are things taboo? My only issue is that I don't think we can fight. Like, I don't think that's a worthy fight. I can watch Charlotte Gainsbourg in Double Penetration and take it in the context of the whole film, but like it's just not going to be a party movie, right? Like,
No.
I think you could have chose better words than take it right there.
Oh God. Oh my God, it's over. We have done it.
This is the director's cut. Okay, thank you all for sticking around.
Yes, thank you. I'm going to take a shot.
Enjoy this
Celebration that it's over.
Awesome. All right, see y'all later.
Thank you.